And for those who enjoy this channel and would love to support us financially, please feel free to hit that donate link. We'd greatly appreciate it. God bless.
Now we have a 25-minute discussion period coming up. So let me set my timer for that, and the two of you can have open discussion about the subject. What's the evidence for biblical creation? So I'm going to start the timer. 25 minutes for discussion. Have at it.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Do you mind if I go first?
Please do.
Great. So I want to correct something that you made in your claim. Tigers and lions can reproduce. It's known as ligers, or they're called tigons or tigons, I believe.
Tigons or ligers. Depends which one is the male. Right.
Correct. And in fact, there has been evidence, I believe, of a female liger reproducing with a male lion or a male tiger. That may be wrong. But so I guess I would have to see what that taxonomy looks like, because whenever you say kinds, that's very vague, and I heard a lot of mites in there. So I mean, do you have a working taxonomy that fits with the model of the known species in the world?
Well, I don't think anybody would argue a tiger and a lion are both in the cat family.
Sure, I agree.
Retractable claws. You know, dogs don't have retractable claws. Cats do. I think all cats do. I don't know.
Yes,
but
I believe so.
To look at this tiger and lion situation and say they can reproduce. Okay, they may be divergent from an original created kind that was somewhere between the two. I don't know how many kinds of cats God made in the Garden of Eden. Doesn't matter to me. There might have been, 50 varieties of birds that he made, and they've now diversified into thousands of varieties of birds. They're still bird. Or in this case, they're still cat. Lion, tiger, and jaguar, and leopards are still the same kind of animal, a cat.
But in Genesis, when it's talking about the kinds, it actually lists different birds as after their kind. Is he talking about birds in general, or those specific types of birds? Like, I know you have an argument about the woodpecker. Do you believe that the woodpecker is a kind all of its own?
I don't know how many varieties of woodpeckers there are. Quite a few, actually, varieties of woodpeckers. There's the red-headed woodpecker.
Sure.
I'm not an expert on birds, but let's assume, pick a number and say God created 50 kinds of birds.
Okay.
I don't think woodpeckers are ancestral, have an ancestor common with eagles or hummingbirds. I would just be a guess on my part. This is called baraminology. There's a website, baraminology.com. Baramin is the Hebrew word for kind. Baraminology.com is a group of folks trying to solve exactly this. How many kinds of animals did Noah take on the ark? So, of course, Noah is not required to take insects or fish, only animals on land in whose nostrils was the breath of life. But their current guess is about 8,000 kinds of animals had to go onto the ark. This would exclude anything in the water, because they had plenty of water outside. So how many kinds of bird? Is a woodpecker the same kind as an eagle? I'd say probably not. But
sure.
keep in mind, I am not asking my theory to be taught in school at taxpayer expense. You guys who believe woodpeckers and mosquitoes and tomatoes are related, you believe a woodpecker is related to a tomato, don't you? If you go back far enough?
I believe that there are DNA similarities. I wouldn't say that they're related necessarily. I think that would be a gross misrepresentation of what relation is.
If I can show you a chart from the textbooks, and there are thousands of them, showing birds and mosquitoes and tomatoes going back with lines to a common ancestor that was single-celled. That is what the books teach. I think you have to admit that. So at least the textbooks teach birds, mosquitoes, and tomatoes have a common ancestor. Somewhere way back there, long ago and far away. That's not science. That's nonsense.
So looking at your claim, you're talking about woodpeckers and eagles and storks, and we can name a variety of birds that can't necessarily interbreed and that are very much different. Flamingos,
Sure.
ostriches. Prima facie, looking at a hummingbird, looking at an eagle, looking at a hawk, looking at them all side by side, prima facie, without any text, whether it be a textbook or a Bible, wouldn't you agree that they likely have a common ancestor?
No. The fact that there are similarities, i.e. they have feathers, just birds that have feathers, there are at least two basic types, those that can fly and those that can't.
Sure, I'm referring to more like bone structure. when you take like an eagle and a hummingbird, for example, the hummingbird has a longer beak for accessing nectar,
Right.
and the eagle, it has talons and a sharp beak for ripping apart its prey. But you take away the feathers, you take away the meat, and you just look at the bones and the bone structures, and there's an incredible amount of similarities there. So did God create different kinds that looked alike?
Well, I think if you look at all the cars built by General Motors or say Chevrolet,
Sure.
and if you take away the paint, take away the body, take away the electrical, I think you find the frame of many of them is probably identical.
Right.
There are some that come down the line and they use the exact same frame to build a 2-door or a 4-door or a hatchback. That's proof of a common designer. That's an engineering feat, not ancestral. So somebody engineered it where the same frame can supply, 2-door, 4-door, hatchback, pickup maybe. So
could an intelligent designer not have created simple organisms that would have been able to evolve a frame, so to speak, that evolved into different hatchbacks or sedans or coupes or whatever?
Well, there's no evidence of any animal changing to anything other kind. So that would be, there's no evidence of it.
There's millions of transitional fossils, but I mean, I really don't want to get into evolution. I would rather stay on the creation claim in Genesis.
I think the creator of the kinds gave us overwhelming evidence that it had to be created. He used the same frame for the birds. Generally, they have a similar shoulder joint and hip joint, okay? But he used a completely different idea for insects. They have the skeleton on the outside, exoskeleton. And so he gave it so that there's so much evidence that you'd have to be a fool to not see there's a designer here. He can design animals that can live with the skeleton on the outside or skeleton on the inside. Are there cars that have the frame on the outside, like a unibody? Well, yeah, actually there are. But again, that's a design, an engineering feat, not ancestral.
Well, I'll agree with you that it's a design feat in that it suits a purpose. Like, for example, a roll cage in NASCAR, it has a purpose. It's not in every car, but it's in NASCAR because if the car flips, you want to protect the driver. And I mean, all I'm seeing in exoskeletons and things of that nature, things used for both defense and offense, are just attributes that are attained through the pressures of their environment that they change and adapt to.
So you think the exoskeleton came as a result of pressures from the environment? In other words, the insect developed this to prevent himself from being eaten.
I'm not saying that that's why it prevented it, but I'm saying that the ones who did produce it, who did have an exoskeleton, that they were the ones who were more suitable to survive within their environment.
And you realize, of course, what you're stating is not based on evidence. It's based on a theoretical belief that there's nobody's ever seen any animal start to gradually produce an exoskeleton.
Well, sure. And we've never seen a star born. We've never seen a star's life cycle, but we have looked at multiple stars and we have seen multiple stages of growth and death within stars that we have been able to make an amalgamation and a better understanding of the life cycle of the star, even though we haven't observed the full life cycle of a star with the human eye.
Well, you're starting with your religious belief that stars do indeed go through a cycle and are born and die. I think
that's not a religious belief, Kent.
I think it is. Okay. Suppose I had a belief that cars came from slowly evolved. I could show you evidence that there are one-wheeled vehicles out there called unicycles. I could show you evidence that there are two-wheeled vehicles, bicycles, motorcycles. I could show you and bring in physical evidence there are three-wheeled vehicles. I could actually arrange them in order: one-wheel, two-wheel, three-wheel, four-wheeler. Does that prove that's how it happened? No, not at all.
Not.
And you guys arranging these things in order that you already think it happened, that's where the problem is. You're doing exactly like I would be, but if I arranged the vehicles in order from 1, 2, 3, 4 wheel. That's not science.
If you group them by the wheel, but you are grouping them by kinds, and that is not science because there's no scientific evidence to support your claim of kinds.
There is overwhelming scientific observable evidence that dogs produce dogs, and that's it. Never an exception.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And the evolutionary model actually supports that. You don't see a non-dog coming from a dog in the evolutionary model unless you're speaking in extreme hyperbole. Unless you're speaking in hyperbole.
Think what you just said. Dogs will always produce dogs. However, going back in time, which we cannot do, but if you could go back in time, the dog came from an amoeba or a single-celled creature, which was certainly a non-dog. So somewhere along the line, the amoeba produced a non-amoeba, and the amoeba, you think, turned into both a dog and a mosquito, because you have lines on paper connecting them. Then somewhere, even though today mosquitoes only produce mosquitoes and dogs only produce dogs, you in your imagination think dogs and mosquitoes are related, so it had to come from something that was non-amoeba or bacteria. So why could it could happen in the past, but it can't happen today? So we can't observe it, or it's not science.
So we don't see a non-dog coming from a dog. We don't see a dog coming from a non-dog. And you say there's no reason to believe that because we can't go back in time to observe that. So what I want to know is why you feel so confident in the claim that men came from mud and the breath of a deity when you can't go back. And there's no evidence that we came from mud. There's no scientific evidence to support that.
Well, General Motors makes all their cars out of natural components that come right out of the ground. They take iron ore, melt it down, make the iron. They add a little nickel or other elements to it, depending on what kind of steel they want. So you could argue that a car is made of 100% natural components, but it had a designer to do it. The mud didn't turn itself into a car, but they took the elements out of the dirt or the mud or the rock. So to say that...
How do you know that?
Well, we know it because we observe it. We did not observe God create man.
We've never observed man coming from mud. Never.
No, we do observe cars coming from natural components. We can observe them digging out the iron ore, melting it down, making the iron, forging it into shape. Every step of a car production can be observed. We do not observe God making man from the mud. I agree. That's why it's a belief. You do not observe a mosquito and a dog coming from a common ancestor. That's why it's a belief. But it's taught in the textbooks, and we're all paying for that religion to be taught. This one says animals, fungi, and plants have a common ancestor. But that's not science. That's
but automobiles do not reproduce that. That's a fallacy, I believe. I mean, because we're not talking about something that can reproduce. We're talking about something that does have a designer, but it's designed to suit a purpose. It's designed to suit a need to fill a slot, so to speak. And your creation account is nothing more than that. It is a creation, a design to fill a spot, and that spot is solidifying the identity of ancient Israelites, of ancient Canaanites, of ancient Babylonians, depending on which creation myth that you want to read.
Well, sure, you can believe that. This is straight from one of the textbooks used today. It says animals, fungi, and plants have a common ancestor. Do you believe fungus and elephants and tomatoes are related, have a common ancestor? That's what we're all paying for this to go in the textbooks.
So when you say believe, do I just believe that? No, but do I accept that other people have done the research, and do I accept the evidence? Then yes, I do. And I would like to add that I find it much more plausible than to say that God did it, and he created us from mud, and that plants lived for an entire day in sub-zero temperatures without a sun.
Well, you brought up several topics that need to be addressed there, but you guys keep wanting to use the word accept. You accept evolution. You have to believe evolution. You guys keep trying to sneak that in. You have to accept truth. You do not have to, but you have to believe that mosquitoes are related. This textbook,
you can believe it, but there's evidence for that belief. There's justification to believe that.
Okay, I think there's evidence to prove dogs always produce dogs and cows always produce cows. That's where the evidence lies.
Do you believe there's evidence that man was created from mud?
No, I think we're made out of natural elements. I think you could find all the elements for man's body in the mud.
So you're interpreting that part allegorically because it doesn't suit your narrative.
I'm saying there is a narrative. There's a book that says God did it. I don't know of a better answer, but I'm not
and you're interpreting part of it literally and part of it allegorically to fix whatever gaps you have in your understanding.
Well, no, you guys are one of the ones with all the gaps in the understanding. We observe cows produce cows, dogs produce dogs.
Yes, you do. That's okay. It's okay to have gaps, Ken.
Well, then call it. Then stop saying you accept it. Admit you believe it. It's a belief. It's a religion on your part.
Okay, I believe it, but I have justification for my belief.
I have justification for my belief. Nobody's ever seen a cow produce a non-cow. Therefore, somebody must have made the original cow.
You do have justification for your own belief, for your belief, but your belief itself does not have justification to be believed by anybody who would, other than people who would just accept it on faith.
Well, I think you need to look in the mirror. Jim, you're the one who has a belief that is not based on any scientific evidence. This textbook shows all the bats in the world are related to the horses and are related to the mice. They put them all together to draw. What they draw lines on paper is all they do. On the outside
No,
of the
that's not
circle,
all they do, Kent. No, the current working evolutionary model has been used for many things, from developing antibiotics to discovering how bacteria works. The current evolutionary model works every day in laboratories, and we make new discoveries because we operate under the assumption that we evolve.
well, the same laboratories could use the assumption that, wow, a designer made these creatures out of the same 92 elements out of the ground. Maybe there are antibiotics that can be used because they have a common ancestor, common designer.
And we'd be wasting our time because scientists would be trying to figure out what kind of mud God used and what his breath contained, what the atmospheric contents of his breath were. And that's absurd, because there's no need to go to that when there's already a working model. Now, if you want to debunk the working model and you want to show inconsistencies, then I would encourage you to accept your Nobel Prize.
Well, I think if you went to North Korea, you would not find any opposition to the idea of communism.
Sure.
I think anybody
Well,
who opposes
actually, I disagree. If you go into the individual homes that are being oppressed, I'm sure that there would be some.
Sure. If anyone dares to speak out against communism, they end up, executed or down the bottom of the Pacific Ocean someplace.
Right. Excommunicated for heresy, so to speak.
I think we have a very similar, not quite as severe, but same thing with those who oppose evolution in the academic circles. It wasn't this way 200 years ago. But evolution religion has slowly taken over our school system, where now if you dare to oppose it, you don't get published, you don't get promoted, you actually get fired. Watch the movie Expelled to see those who say, look, I don't think evolution works. They'll get fired from their job.
Sure, because we're talking about the separation of church and state. People who make these assumptions under theological presuppositions do not need to be teaching in the public school system. They do not need to be funded by our government, which clearly states that there needs to be a separation between theology and government.
Thank you. I would point out those who believe mosquitoes and tomatoes are related, regardless of how much time you want to give them, should not be allowed to teach that to children.
I don't believe that people should be allowed to teach anything that cannot be demonstrated. I don't believe people should be allowed to teach anything that there's not evidence to believe that, such as God created man and then later created woman from his side. I think it's totally absurd. And again, there's no evidence that women were made from man. I mean, we can go into the different creation accounts. We can go into authorship and everything like that. I don't think it's necessary, but I do encourage you to read the difference in accounts as far as to when God made woman between the account in Genesis 1 and the account in Genesis 2.
Yeah, I could not prove scientifically that woman was made from a rib from man. I think we can show that there are obvious structural similarities, and digestive tract is about identical, and there are thousands of identical systems between man and women. Praise God for the differences too, but there are obviously some similarities. Again, I would say that may be an indication of a common designer, just like the Ford, just like the 2-door and the 4-door and the hatchback have same frame, same electrical system, same paint job. It doesn't prove common ancestor.
You just said that you had evidence that women was created from a rib. Can you
I cannot prove that. I can't prove that scientifically. That's what the text says. Oh, but by the way, you can't disprove that either.
Well, I mean, I can't disprove that women wasn't made by scrunching up some silk and wrapping it in duct tape.
That's not what the text says. The text says the woman was made from man's rib. The purpose of this debate is the evidence of the biblical creation. Do you have any evidence to counter that? Forget the duct tape. The Bible says Eve was made from a rib. By the way, there's only one bone in the human body that'll grow back if you take it out, and that's your rib.
Well, I would like to clarify, to point out that you said that there is no evidence that a woman was created from a rib. So I'm sure you've heard this saying, that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. So there's no reason for me to try to disprove it, because you haven't in any way proved that women came from a rib.
Okay, that which has no evidence can be dismissed. There is no evidence a dog came from anything other than a dog. Not going forward. Yes, there is. Produce dogs in the future. You think in the past a dog came from a non-dog. There's no evidence of a dog ever coming from a non-dog. We can dismiss the whole evolution theory. There is no evidence of any dog coming from a non-dog in the past.
There's no evidence of the 6,000-year-old Earth, Ken.
That's what you're changing topics here. You're diverting. Okay.
No, I'm talking about claims versus evidence for the claims. And I would argue that I have much more evidence. Now, while it's not complete, while it is, yes, it is a theory, but it is a working theory. There is truth within the theory. If anything in there conflicts with what we know to be true, then it's thrown out. It's no longer considered a theory, Kent, like gravity.
Yay. Well, then throw it out, because we've only seen dogs produce dogs, and you think dogs and mosquitoes have a common ancestor. Throw that theory out, son. That's not science.
Yeah, there is genetical information. There's genetical data that ties us all together. Do you deny that?
We don't. Well, that could be a common design. I think the Fords and the Chevys are both made out of steel. Comes on from the same dirt. Doesn't prove they're
yes, and they're also not living beings. So I think that's a false representation.
Well, you're giving a false representation, saying, "Wow, look, we don't see dogs always produce dogs in the future, but in the past, you think it was different." That's not science. That's a religion. You believe dogs came from something single-celled. You believe that single-celled creature produced something that was ultimately turned into a dog. This is a religious belief, Jim. This is not science. And I wish you guys would.
And what do you believe? What do you believe? Where do you believe the animals came from? Where do you believe man came from?
I don't see any other option than to say there must be a designer that made this. If I walked into a town that was deserted out west, John Wayne, a deserted desert town, a cowboy town, I look at these buildings, say, wow, there's nobody here, but I think somebody built these buildings. I could walk into a town, I could find an arrowhead and say, I think somebody made this. I don't know who, I don't know when, but somebody made it. I think you can look at a mosquito under a microscope and say, wow, this has amazing design, digestive system. It can fly, for heaven's sake. That's complicated. It can reproduce. You talk about a complicated system. Reproduction is mind-bogglingly complex in all the things that have to happen just right. Any system, the eyes, of the smelling system is so complex, I would say it's logical to say there's a designer. Now, who is that designer? Is it Allah, Buddha, Jehovah? That becomes a different set of arguments. But to get over hurdle number one, somebody designed the mosquito.
Okay, so you believe that this was all designed and it was done by a creator, and it is centered around us, I believe. I believe that you believe that humans and the God of the Bible have a unique connection, correct?
Oh, yeah, I believe there's three different kinds of life. I think
if that is the case, then why is it that out of all, my apologies, out of the entire electromagnetic spectrum, humans can only see less than 0.004 of it. It's like 0.0035% of the entire electromagnetic spectrum.
Right.
Humans, for example, in wavelength reception, humans can only recept somewhere between 380 to 740 nanometers. But you have beings like the mantis shrimp, who I don't believe are hoping for salvation, or that they were created for any divine purpose, and yet their wavelength reception is much better than ours, 300 to 720, so a much wider range of wavelength reception. So there's so much that is created that is not for us. In Genesis 1, it tells us that these stars were made to be signs for planting crops and signs for recognizing the changes of the seasons. And some would argue that it's the zodiac. But
2 minutes, gentlemen.
They were created for that reason, yet we know for a fact that there are stars in our universe that not only have we not seen with the naked eye, but we will probably never see.
And how do you know that for a fact?
Well, are you familiar with the term the universe horizon, or the horizon effect?
Yes, I understand. I believe you're probably true, but you don't know that that's correct. I'm just pointing out this is a belief. I believe the same thing.
Okay, yes, I don't know in an epistemological sense, as in it hasn't been demonstrated to be completely true. Like I'm not holding it in my hands. You're right. There is no conclusive study. But at the same time, I have justification to believe that, and there's no reason for me to say, well, God created these stars for humans, and well, this has to be all there is because the Bible says so.
Okay, I have justification. If I walk into a deserted cowboy town out west, I would have justification for believing somebody made this. Even though
and you can find out who. You can find out who through archaeology. You can find out through experimenting from the past, from testing.
Okay, let's allow Dr. Hovind just to have equal time with response there. Go ahead, Dr. Hovind. Finish your sentence.
The buildings in this cowboy town are made out of wood and probably nails, which are made from iron. Those are natural components. We can see trees growing all over, but we never see wood cut into those shapes and nailed together in that way. It would be logical to say somebody built this building. or made this town, laid it out in a street down the middle, and buildings on the side. Maybe there's a reason for that, traffic flow. I think we can study the human body or the body of a mosquito or a star and say there's a reason for this. If you'd rather be a mantis shrimp to get their eyes, that's up to you. Go ahead and swap eyes if you'd like. But I think maybe a reason we see a small part of the spectrum is that God's got a big surprise for us when we go to heaven. Hey, guys, new eyes, you can see the whole thing. You can now see the sounds. Whoa, that'll be cool. I don't know, but I'm looking forward to going there. I would like you to come too, Jim. Would you like to come?
Yeah, it would be cool, Kent. I do not disagree with you. It would be cool to go to an afterlife where I don't hurt anymore, where my senses are enhanced, where I didn't have to worry about anything, where I could see my loved ones, I could meet my family. I could experience all this peace. But
that's time, gentlemen.
But
it's available.
There's no evidence you can have that is true.
It is true. I've got it already.
Whoever wants to lead is fine with me. You can take turns, I suppose.
Do you mind if I do, or do you want to? It doesn't matter to me.
Well, I mean, I got a few. Well, I want to say thanks for your rebuttal, keeping it respectful. It's up to you. I mean, I've got I know you talked about science.
Okay,
and
I'll ask you just a real quick question, and then and it doesn't really involve anything else, so you can segue right off that into whatever you want to get into.
No problem. Go ahead, brother.
Whenever you started out, if you don't mind, look back at your script, and I would like for you to tell me when you said that you started off with an assumption. Well, what is the assumption that you start off with?
Well, if we start off with the assumption that, say, the Bible is true and the Bible is the history book of the universe, we can make retrodictions, predictions,
Sure.
Testable predictions actually is what I'm making here as well. So if those are confirmed and those are consistent, say in regards to at least retrodictions, then that's pretty significant proof that, the Genesis story as found in the Bible should be taken literally. In a lot of your other religious books, you're not going to be able to make these accurate retrodictions and predictions. So if I started with the assumption that Genesis is true, but then I couldn't make accurate retrodictions, accurate predictions, that are falsifiable, well, then that's a very good sign that.
What predictions can you make?
Well, for example, we can make predictions based on the fact that Adam and Eve were created with pre-existing functional DNA differences. So it would be ad hoc if that didn't make any testable predictions. But of course, we would say that we'd expect those DNA differences that are encoded into Adam and Eve, into the created kinds, would be functional. Versus, say,
that's what we'd expect, but that's not prediction. What you're doing is you're describing it here. You're giving it body. They just say that we didn't know. All right, say that we have all the knowledge that we do about mitochondrial DNA and everything else that you've talked about. What future predictions can you make?
Well, for example, that is a future prediction, because I've talked to many evolutionists. They'll admit that, max functionality of the genome is maybe 20%, probably more like 10%. But what we actually now know is that at least 80% of, the non-coding DNA, we know that that's transcribed in RNA, which suggests function. And the trajectory of discovery favors genome-wide functionality, not just 20%.
Where in the Bible?
That is a prediction. That's a testable prediction, my man.
How much? What I'm saying is who is predicting this? Because it's not the Bible. The Bible doesn't predict anything about DNA.
We're making a prediction based on the fact that God, his command to be fruitful and multiply, we're not saying that was to be carried out by cloning. So if you acknowledge that very specific genetic view, the fact that, these design variants that God would have placed into Adam and Eve and the created kinds, we'd predict that those would be functional DNA differences. So we're predicting contradictory to the evolutionists that say max amount of genome functionality is 20%. We're saying that the vast majority of DNA is functional. We're actually seeing that right now, because contradictory to the evolutionary view, the non-coding DNA, it actually functions much like a computer, and it's but regulatory functions. Yeah, go ahead.
But my point is that your presupposition is the only thing that is you have the presupposition, you have the means to get to your conclusion, and then you have the conclusion that you just got to, and none of those are in the Bible. Those are things that that you use not the Bible for, but science for. You can make all those predictions without the Bible. I'm talking about predictions you can make with the Bible. We're talking about evidence for your God creating the universe.
Well, no, it's the Bible as recorded in Genesis that actually tells us that Adam and Eve were the first male and female in existence, and that God created these created kinds. And we can actually see that this is a prediction that flows naturally from Genesis. So if this is a prediction that is actually falsified, then yeah, that prediction based on that pre-existing heterozygosity, that would be false. I'm telling you, you can go in the lab, you can do whatever you have, because you know what, we understand very little of the DNA language, probably less than 5% since comprehensive knockout experiments on humans. Fortunately, it's unethical. They've yet to be performed. So for any evolutionists to say, oh, max 20% functionality, that's premature to make that claim. And we're actually putting it on paper that, you know, this is a prediction, genome-wide functionality.
Okay.
And so
Who's
far that's
predicting this?
Well, intelligent design advocates have always predicted that. For example, these pseudogenes are now known to be DNA functional elements. ERVs, endogenous retroviruses, are now known to be functional in the placenta and the embryo.
So what you're saying is the Bible isn't doing this. It's you have prophets. Is that what you're saying? They prophesied this?
No. This wasn't a prophecy. I'm talking about intelligent design advocates, proponents, scientists. They've always said, why would we create like a car that's 80% junk? So obviously, if we're created by God and then we're making the hypothesis that Adam and Eve, based on the Bible and God's command to be fruitful and multiply, was not to be carried out by cloning, we'd expect these functional DNA differences, and that's actually what we're seeing. So they're not these evolutionary leftovers, these genomic fossils.
Okay, well, you know what? And that's not my claim. Like, you're sitting here, you're wanting to apparently argue an evolutionist. That's apparently what you came here for. I'm not arguing for evolution. I'm arguing against creationism. And you have still yet to provide evidence for it, because none of the claims that you made about genetic entropy or any of this stuff has anything to do with creationism or the Bible or your God. And I'm honest.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Of course, if the Bible records a time of extremely long lives, we would expect that, looking at our lives now, looking at the accumulating mutation-related diseases, I mean, we see it. It's entropic degeneration on all levels. And we actually see that these low-impact deleterious mutations are degenerating us. And we see that Genesis records a time of increased longevity. That's a direct prediction from Genesis. I mean, how else do you explain that?
No, it's not. Because, first of all, the people who Genesis is writing about, it isn't even proposed to be, it's not even written around the time these people were proposed to have lived. So there's that. Secondly, I don't want you to slap and run. I don't want you to slap and run. The Bible clearly records the ages, and then we see a significant drop off. It's a decay curve, the exact same decay curve we see based on this accumulating damage by low impact deleterious mutation. I mean, you can deny science all you want. You're right. You're right.
Point of least genetic.
You do see a dive off. You see Methuselah living to Genesis. Right, you see Methuselah living that long. You see Moses living, or Noah living that long. In fact, he was like 600 before he started building a boat. Abraham. I mean, all these,
which makes sense, right? Because we've accumulated these genetic mistakes, these degenerate,
and these start dropping off, right? Sense. Right. Okay. So it's really funny that the low point of that is right around the time that we start having verifiable evidence of life expectancy, because life expectancy has done nothing but go up.
Well, no.
Yes.
The average lifespan has gone up based on medical intervention, but the maximum lifespan, come on, man, that has not gone up. That will not go up. And we see entropic degeneration on all levels, increased rates of cancer, autism, immunological diseases. It's ever. You have to be a science denialist to stay. And you see that the ages have dropped off post-flood. You see that actually in Leviticus, that's when Moses put in the law that you can't marry close relatives, because we know those shared genetic mistakes, marrying close relatives, well, that's going to expose the hidden reservoir of genetic mistakes. But they didn't have that pre-flood. They didn't have that.
Can you demonstrate anybody in the past 1,000 years, in the past 2,000 years, in this reported by a historian, whatever, that is said whose lifespan exceeds that of today?
Well, I mean, we have thousands and thousands of legends of the golden age where people were said to have lived to 900, 800, 1,000. We see it recorded in the Bible. That's a historical
yes,
record.
it is recorded in the Bible. It is recorded in the Bible, and when it is recorded, it is not recorded at a time that these people were to have lived.
See, the thing is, we're making predictions and retrodictions right from I want to mention something which you said about Y, because I'm glad that you actually addressed the Y chromosomal atom. So you obviously see if that's true, Y chromosomal atom, mitochondrial Eve, if that's true, you're saying that, they're separated, they're thousands and thousands of years ago. But how do you explain, based on the observed mutation rate of, let's just say, the human Y chromosome,
okay,
the fact that there's so little mutations and such low genetic diversity between any two humans, max 0.5% different, and that's why the evolutionists have to resort to a bottleneck. So how do you explain that?
There isn't much genetic diversity because, I mean, we stay to ourselves. I mean, we marry within our own cultures. In fact, in places that we see the most genetic diversity are the places where they have outsiders coming in, where they're actually expanding the gene pool, so to speak.
But the small number of mutations that separate modern men from the sequence of Y chromosome atom, that actually indicates that this man lived in the relatively recent past. You said thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago. So how do you reconcile that without invoking something like a near extinction event?
Because for one, I am not operating on your presupposition that there is genetic entropy, that it's just this perpetual entropy to where we're just like dwindling down to nothing. Like what you understand genetical entropy to be, and what genetical entropy really are two totally different things. Like genetical entropy are things like aging and Alzheimer's and miscarriages and speech impediments. I mean, there's so many, but what it is, what genetic entropy.
Well, no. I just want to correct you there real quick before you go on too long. What genetic entropy is the fact that most mutations, they're nearly neutral. So they're unselectable, they're invisible to natural selection. So they accumulate very small effects, and then they accumulate relentlessly. So natural selection, which I'm sure you're aware of, that's going to amplify the best beneficial mutations and get rid of the worst detrimental mutations. But at the end of the day, it can't do anything against the invisible damage caused by near neutral, low impact mutations. So how are you going to solve that degeneration problem if those mutations build up? 100 per person per generation. That's 700 billion new mutations, unselectable this generation alone. So what type of mechanism, what type of selection are you going to use to resolve that problem there, Jim?
What math are you using to come to that? How are you verifying that there's, what did you say, 7 million mutations?
Well, I'm saying that it's widely recognized. You can just Google it. It's
recognized?
It's recognized by the evolutionary community that we inherit 100 new mutations per person per generation.
I'm talking about passing them on, because there's one thing about inheriting a gene that may have not been how would you call it? I'm not a geneticist. I guess activated, so to speak.
I understand what you're saying, but I mean, are you disagreeing with the fact? I mean, we begin to add new mutations to, say, our genetic load at the first division of our zygote, and I think it's approximately 3 new mutations every cell division throughout our lifetime. But it's just 100 mutations through our reproductive lines, through our reproductive cells, because your somatic mutations, they're not going to be passed on, say, from your skin cells, for example. I mean, we actually die due primarily to mutation accumulation, but it's the 100 mutations per person per generation that we accumulate. So like my children, they're going to have 100 more mistakes than I have, and my children's children, they're going to have 200 approximately more mistakes than I have. So those mutations are pouring into the population. How do you resolve that? That's perfectly consistent with Genesis.
But no, it's not consistent with Genesis, because Genesis doesn't make that claim. But what I'm saying is, though, Genesis doesn't say anything about genetic entropy. Like, you are making that.
Are you saying that the Bible doesn't say that the entire creation grows?
You just talked like a minute straight.
Well, I just don't want you to slap and run, because the Bible does say after the fall, we have now experienced death. By one man, death was
Standing.
brought into the world. Death, extinction. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I just want to make sure that I totally understand that you have to be able to give answers to the objections because you're defending, that you're the only one defending of you, but just to get a little bit more time from Jim in terms of...
But I want to apologize. I'm just saying because if my direct predictions and retrodictions are coming from Genesis and he's saying Genesis doesn't say that, obviously we know after the fall, yeah, death was brought into the world by one man, Adam. So just wanted to correct you on that, but go ahead. I won't interrupt.
No, and to me, like, that's not something that I have to account for. That's not something that I have to explain, because I'm perfectly happy with letting scientists and geneticists further map the genomes and further map these Y chromosomes and further understand these and to be able to sample them more and discover these different mutations, because only by discovering these mutations can we rearrange the family tree. Can we see what that Y chromosome Adam was and where he came from and how we all fit into this. Like, only by doing genetic research can we do that. And there's no genetic research in the Old Testament, bottom line.
Well, yeah, we are, for example, there are, like, for example, population geneticists, they widely recognize that human mutation is catastrophic and that man is presently degenerating. They've come up with, mechanisms, say synergistic epistasis, mutation count mechanism to attempt to solve the problem. It was an evolutionary population geneticist by the name of Alexei Kondrashov. He actually said, why are we not extinct 100 times over? Because he's recognizing that this accumulation of low impact deleterious mutations, it is a problem, and genomes are devolving and the genome is rusting out like a car. And I know you're not here to defend evolution, but you know what, these evolutionists say we started off as a single-celled organism, multi-celled organism, fish.
Right. And that's the thing, though. Like, I'm not here to defend evolutionism, and you're not here to argue against it. You're here to argue for the creation of the universe.
Which I am. I agree with what I'm just saying it's a double whammy. It demonstrates biblical creation, a literal interpretation in Genesis, and it destroys pond scum to people evolution. That's why I love it. It's evolutions. It happens in the imagination of those who want to believe in it. And at the end of the day, all the evidence points right back to a time of creation, a time of perfection. It's devolution, not evolution. That's what we.
Sure, it does. Going off of your first sentence of your opening statement, if you're operating from a presupposition, because if you're not operating from the Bible, you can look at many texts and you can read genetics, you can read whatever you want into text. As a matter of fact, the older the text, the better. It's a lot easier to read BS into a literary device. The Old Testament's really good at that. You can make it seem whatever you want, and that's why there are young Earth creationists. That's why there are old Earth creationists. That's why nobody can make their mind up, because people read into it what they want to read into it.
Okay, let me ask you a question then. Okay, so at least you agree. You think, obviously you've said that it was written afterwards and all this, but at least we agree the Bible does record a time when people had extremely long lives. Okay, so let's stay there. Now, if there were initially, say, no mutation, let's say theoretically, hypothetically, just kind of work with me. Let's just say there were initially no mutations. Wouldn't you expect, Jim, just be honest with yourself, be honest with the evidence, wouldn't you expect the maximal human age to be much longer? Doesn't that just make logical sense, just hypothetically?
No, it doesn't.
Oh, okay, so if we die primarily due to mutation accumulation, we see there's entropic degeneration on all levels. Thousands and thousands of new mutations related diseases are added to the database every year. Obviously, if you take that back to a point of least genetic entropy, that makes complete sense. And the Bible report, but if you're just going to say no to that, then there's nothing more than I can say in regards to that. But if you actually look at the Bible,
but there's not, because I have no frame of reference. Like, you're asking me to just presume that these people really were this old, when all evidence that we have from all of written history, like, we know that people don't live to be that old. As a matter of fact, it's pretty common knowledge that the farther you go back, the shorter people's lives were.
Well, actually, for one, I've already said there's thousands of legends of the Golden Age, okay?
I'm sorry, was that legends?
Everything you see in the fossil record, everything was bigger. Everything, look at the megalodon shark. It was massive. Look at kangaroos were huge, dinosaurs. Everything just points to the fact that we are living in a fallen, degenerate world. Look at life around us. Look at it. The thing is, if you actually look at, let's say when the lifespan of early, biblical characters and their ages are compared in the Bible, since I'm defending the Bible data, even if you don't agree with it, it clearly reveals, you can actually plot a graph with all the ages and the decline. It does reveal an exponential. And that curve can only be described as biological. I don't know any other way.
No, it can't. No, look, entropy is natural. It is natural. I mean, one day our sun is going to implode. One day our sun is going to implode upon itself. At one point, this Earth couldn't survive because it was too hot, and one day it won't be able to survive because it's too cold. And if you're taking the Genesis account literally, I mean, how did plants survive without water when when they were when plants were here the day before water? How did they grow? I mean, we could go into that petty stuff.
Okay, well, if you want to, okay, so you were talking about testable and falsifiable predictions. So I've given you a few based on genetics. If you want to go into, say, for example, say the flood. Okay, so if we're going to look at all the layers, the fossil record, I mean, we can even make testable predictions based on the global flood that's actually been confirmed.
Can we touch on the example that I made?
What's the example you made? Are you talking about plants on?
We're at.
Are you saying at 20? What's that, James?
Actually, time.
Standing for truth. Are you ready? You're muted.
Oh, so sorry there, I was muted. Okay, thank you so much for that opening statement there, Adam. I've got a few things written down here. You claim that I didn't provide any evidence and that I just proved and gave evidence that fish to fisherman evolution is false, and then asked for evidence outside of biblical evidence. Well, we're making hypotheses, we're making predictions and retrodictions directly from the Bible's claim that God created Adam and Eve, and that everybody descends from Adam and Eve. So I did give plenty of evidence, which I could reiterate here. More evidence, too, that we can get that's not just specifically genetics would be that following family history back, if we do that, many cultures around the world who supposedly never met have linkages and genealogies going all the way back to either Noah and some even to Adam in an unbroken line. I'm mainly defending it through genetics. You did mention mitochondrial Eve, which was one of the lines of evidence that I utilized. The evolutionist claim that the Eve, the mitochondrial Eve, is not the Eve of the Bible, is based on evolutionary assumptions, which is why I addressed that in my opening and how that the evolutionary rescue device is dead. I'd like to see Adam address the fact that what we have is low genetic diversity, which is why evolutionists have to resort to the evolutionary bottleneck hypothesis. But at the end of the day, that is nothing more than an ad hoc rescue device to explain away the fact that myself and somebody halfway around the world is no more than 0.1% different. That alone proves that we came from just two people, a small founding population. Now, their rescue device to explain that involves an extended and lengthy near extinction event. It's nothing more than a fairy tale, because that hypothesis is associated with severe inbreeding. It's not even remotely feasible. So at the end of the day, that fact of low genetic diversity in human beings remains a very serious theoretical problem. So he's going to have to deal with that, of course. Now, I did bring up not only low genetic diversity, but the fact that we can use mitochondrial DNA to trace back right to one female ancestor, as well as the three major haplogroups, which I spent a significant amount of time on, making predictions, making retrodictions, future testable predictions that I'd like to see him address. There's predictions right from Noah and Noah's flood story. The fact that all people are closely related, there's only a few mitochondrial DNA lines, as I talked about, the Y chromosome line, evidence of rapid population growth. At the end of the day, we're saying that God specially created Adam and Eve. That Adam and Eve, humans, were not related to apes. We're not related to chimpanzees. And that's why I did touch on a few of the lines of evidence that evolutionists will use. And you did bring up the chromosome 2 fusion, which the fact is it's a failed prediction. And if there actually was a fusion, there's certain things we should see. But the fact is the telomeres that serve as end caps to protect the DNA. And the funny thing is one of their jobs is to actually prevent fusion. Now, why were they involved in a fusion if one of their jobs is to prevent it? So we should see these remnant telomeres, and there's a major struggle to find these remnants. It's degenerate. The evolutionists are asking, and why is it so degenerate? Why isn't there more sequences? And the reason is because it's not a fusion. There shouldn't be two telomeres because it's not a fusion event. I went into pseudogenes. I went into the fact that they were wrong about the similarity between apes and humans. And there's evidence upon evidence. The Y chromosome, I talked about the Y chromosomal atom. All of this, if you use the empirical method, takes us back to two ancestors, Adam and Eve, just 6,000 years ago. The only way around it that the evolutionist has is to recalculate using unrealistic mutation rates and evolutionary phylogenetic assumptions that aren't realistic. We're using the empirical method. I've given evidence that is undeniable of a literal Adam and Eve and Noah's 3 daughters-in-law, right from genetics. Traits are inherited, and that's what I'm using to prove the Genesis story. If the Genesis story wasn't making accurate predictions, retrodictions, and it was a failed hypothesis, then Adam here might actually have a point. Y chromosome DNA alone proves that man is not related to chimps, that man was specially created in the image of God. The extensively and remarkably different DNA sequence of the Y chromosomes between human and chimp presents a very serious problem for common ancestry. It's a double whammy. It disproves human evolution, and it proves special creation. And that's what I'm here to do, is to provide evidence for special creation. Now, given the low level of recombination and DNA sequence diversity on the Y chromosome specifically, the human evolution paradigm, which Adam admits he holds to, encounters a fatal blow and a serious problem. The problem is that the human and chimp Y chromosomes should be considerably more similar to each other. If human evolution is true, they should be the most similar chromosomes in the genome because they are so stable. And we see the opposite. And it's a sad state of affairs because all the evidence points to a literal Adam and Eve and a literal interpretation of Genesis. You can even look to linkage. How much time do I have, Matt?
30 seconds.
Even linkage blocks, for example, the persistence of sizable linkage blocks throughout the human genome is inconsistent with evolutionary theory, and it's very consistent with a very limited set of initial chromosomes in Eden. Everything genetics disproves evolution. It supports biblical creation. I've given more than enough evidence genetically, historically, and right from the Bible that Adam and Eve and Noah existed. And that's the topic and title of the debate. So I'm hoping that Adam can actually address the evidence, address the 3 major haplogroups, and address the evidence that supports mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam, especially the low genetic diversity. I'd like to see him address that too. Thanks so much.
All right, Adam, you were up.
Well, you keep saying you're saying things like if human evolution is true and all the evidence points to creation, but you're not showing any evidence pointing to a literal Adam and Eve or a literal Noah. Your argument, as I said previously, is evolution is wrong. That's you keep presenting evidence that you feel disproves evolution, but you're not presenting evidence that bolsters your claim that there was a literal Adam and Eve and there was a literal Noah. I understand evolution and I accept evolution, and I think evolution explains the world very well, but this debate is not about the veracity of evolution. This debate is about whether or not Adam and Eve actually lived in a garden as the creation story indicates. You haven't presented any evidence that there was an actual garden, that there was an actual Adam and Eve. You seem to accept evolution in certain ways. I mean, you accept the fact that there was a fusion on chromosome 2 because you're saying that I guess you're saying that I'll let you explain your understanding of the fusion of chromosome 2, but you seem to note that evidence is out there. You mentioned something about the Y chromosome should be larger or smaller. So you seem to know a lot about genetics and know a lot about evolution. That's neither here nor there when examining the claim that there is a literal Adam and Eve that lived in a garden, that were created, that there was a literal Noah that encountered a flood that covered the earth. If there are two paradigms kind of at odds with each other here. There's the biblical paradigm and there is the scientific paradigm. And sure, you could be correct in the biblical paradigm. All of the narrative stories in the Bible could support your claims. But if you're going to argue in the scientific realm, if you're going to use all of this scientific data, then you have to present scientific data that actually Adam and Eve lived. So I'm here basically to assess your evidence for a literal Adam and Eve, a literal Noah, a literal flood, any of that kind of stuff. And all you're doing is presenting me with arguments that evolution can't be true. That's not what the debate is about, okay? I didn't come to defend evolution. I came to assess your evidence that there was a literal Adam and Eve and a literal Noah. So please present that evidence.
Okay, you went 3 minutes, so we'll add those 3 back to the Q&A. So we're up to 29 minutes for Q&A.
Are we going to have some back and forth here?
Portion, which is 20 minutes. And I just wanted to remind the audience, send your questions to Modern Day Debate at any time. We're gathering them up. Praise, have you been taking the questions? I'm writing them down as well.
Got them. Yep, I got every single one.
Okay, great. Are they in proportion, or should we get more? Yeah. Should we ask for more questions?
Oh, we can get a couple more. Yeah, let them come on in.
Okay, great. Yeah, keep shooting your questions in, and standing for truth. And Adam, are you both here and ready?
I'm good. Yeah.
Sure. I guess I would just like to ask him real quick how he would explain the 3 major haplogroups, as well as the fact that what we do see in the human population and human genetics is low genetic diversity, right? Like me and any other person on this planet is no more than 0.1% different. Therefore, why does the evolutionist, and I know I'm using evolutionist, but at the end of the day, it's because it's evidence of a small founding population, which is exactly what the Bible, a literal interpretation of Genesis, predicts. So how do you explain that? And then therefore, how do you not see that as evidence for Adam and Eve and a small founding population, as I indicated? Go ahead.
Even if there is low genetic diversity and a small founding population, it doesn't mean that it was Adam and Eve. It doesn't make it a creationist story. The cheetahs were knocked back to a population of 7,000, and they suffer from all kinds of genetic diversity issues. Cheetahs have a terrible time going because they lost a lot of their genetic diversity through some kind of famine or some kind of hardship. There are probably plenty of times when humans were knocked back to a small population. I mean, a lot of the moral psychology comes out of the fact that this is probably how religions evolved. Humans were knocked back to small tribal bands, and those small tribal bands went to war with one another. So just because there's limited genetic diversity, it's not evidence for little Adam and Eve.
Well, thanks for your response there, Adam. So I am glad that you brought up the cheetahs and then the cheetah populations, because you're right. There's approximately, I think it's about 10,000 cheetahs left in the world today. And conservationists feel the cheetah is already showing serious signs of inbreeding and genetic decline, as you stated. So there's that's not enough.
That's not modern day. The cheetahs have always had a problem. They predict that millions of years ago, they were knocked back to 7,000, a population of near 7,000. So it's not a thing today. They've always had low genetic diversity.
Well, the millions of years, of course, is based on assumption. But what I'm saying, and it seems like you agree, is that there's just not enough of them. And genetic diversity has eroded due to the inbreeding. So what we do see in the cheetah species is that they're expressing many destructive recessive mutations. But why that's important in regards to my model is that the Bible tells us that we started off with just 2 people. Therefore, we would expect and predict low genetic diversity. But according to your worldview and what you hold to in regards to evolutionary theory, you wouldn't expect nor predict low genetic diversity. But what you do resort to explain the low genetic variation is a near extinction event. But the cheetah populations and how they're expressing these destructive recessive mutations actually in and of itself debunks this so-called population bottleneck that you have to resort to. So how do you, I guess here's the question I would have for you, take as much time as you need. How could such a tiny, nearly extinct, genetically compromised population, okay, suddenly explode into all parts of the planet, seizing dominion over the world, if what we would see is this homogeneity, this inbreeding, of course, with that small population? Take your time.
Well, once again, I'm not here to defend the genetics. I'm here to assess your claim that there was a literal Adam and Eve. Like these claims. So are you making the claim that if there was a human population that was small, therefore it had to be Adam and Eve? What is more plausible, that there was that humans evolved from a small population, or there was a famine or an earthquake or a volcano that knocked humans back, or an asteroid striking the earth, something like that knocked humans back to a small population, or that God created Adam and Eve and started the human race that way? I mean, which seems more plausible with a naturalistic explanation of the world?
Well, I appreciate your response. Good questions. The point is that, if we only started with 2 people, what does that do, Adam? It restricts the diversity today. So from the biblical model, which is what I'm defending, we all come from just 2 people. That means the limited diversity that we actually see is easy to explain. But any alternative is a serious problem because of this limited genetic variation. And that's why the evolutionist has to resort to the population bottleneck. But I'm saying that population bottleneck is nothing but a fairy tale. It's nothing but pseudoscience, because it would have resorted in severe inbreeding, and it's not even remotely feasible. So I understand
why is your population bottleneck not a fairy tale and my population bottleneck is? Because you're saying the same thing about the population bottleneck. You're just saying it's biblically founded. You believe in a population bottleneck, do you not?
Right. No, I definitely believe in.
So why is mine a fairy tale and yours is not?
Okay, so the reason why, from let's say the evolutionary perspective, that this human genetic homogeneity remains a very.
Let's talk about your perspective, because you seem to think.
I want to answer your question though, because you asked me why isn't it a problem for me, but it's a problem for you. Well, the thing is, we start with just 2 people, okay? Mm-hmm. But it's a very benign population bottleneck. And then 10 generations later, a second single generation bottleneck, right, at Noah's flood, of just 8 people occurred. This was at the time of Noah. But both these bottlenecks, Adam, were very brief, just 1 generation. Then they're followed by explosive growth. And in both cases, there would be almost no previously accumulated mutations, hence no inbreeding effects. That's the problem with the evolutionary population bottleneck, is that it's prolonged. Therefore, there are inbreeding effects. So the very limited human genetic diversity that I talk about, it still remains a huge problem for evolutionary theory. And that's why it resorts to the unrestrained storytelling. Because from you so far, all I really see is storytelling. But the whole point is it is compatible with the biblical perspective. And we don't even require any far-fetched mental inventions. God created 2 people. What do we see today? Low genetic diversity. Makes complete sense. Evidence for Adam and Eve. Go ahead.
I'm going to ask you something. I mean this in all sincerity. I don't mean to disparage you or anything. The inbreeding argument, is that a standard anti-theist argument, an argument against the Noah and Adam and Eve?
I think it might be a straw man argument if you don't understand the biblical model and genetic degeneration and the accumulation of low impact deleterious mutations, because at that time, there wouldn't have been an accumulation of mutations. But according to the evolutionary theory, over deep time, right, as evolution would propose, any large population, what are they going to do? They're going to accumulate enormous numbers of mutations, which results in enormous amounts of
inbreeding. Is the inbreeding argument a standard anti-theist argument against your position?
Are you saying, do atheists use that against my biblical position?
Yes,
they do. But like I said, it's a straw man argument and understanding of the biblical based model, because what is inbreeding? It's the exposing of the hidden reservoir of genetic mistakes. But you need genetic mistakes to begin with in order to see those inbred mistakes. Adam and Eve wouldn't have had any mutations, and at the time of the flood, there would have been very little accumulating mutations. But according to the evolutionary population bottleneck theory, there would have been an excessive amount of mutations. Plus, the whole point is that this population bottleneck that the evolutionists propose in the out of Africa theory, it's prolonged. It's not prolonged in the biblical model. That's the whole point. So, I mean, do you have an explanation that doesn't involve, say, stories and imagination to explain this? I mean, I've studied their explanation, and that is their explanation. But the point is, it's just not feasible. Do you have a feasible explanation for the low genetic diversity that doesn't involve this inbred population bottleneck that would leave these, Homo erectus, early human populations genetically compromised?
Well, I'm just curious why you're countering an argument I've never made. This is not, I'm not making the standard anti-theist arguments here. I'm here to assess your position. You have a position that Adam and Eve actually lived and Noah actually lived. I'm looking at it from a scientific paradigm where I'm saying, okay, what evidence do you have? You are saying you have a thesis that you've gathered from the Bible, which that's fine, but what evidence have you gathered based on your thesis? It sounds like you're countering standard anti-theist arguments, but I don't necessarily know why.
Well, definitely, yeah. If you don't use that argument, that's awesome. You're not strawmanning the position. But at the same time, it doesn't actually help your position, because your explanation for the low genetic diversity is not feasible. It's a rescue device. But our explanation for the low genetic diversity doesn't involve storytelling, imagination. It just makes sense and flows from the biblical perspective. Aren't you looking for evidence for okay, let's do this. If we'll agree to disagree on the low genetic diversity, I would have to say, and I mean this in all due respect.
Are you saying human beings have low genetic diversity? Because first of all, we would have to establish, well, what is low and high? Like, where are you getting this from? Why do you assume that we have low genetic diversity? Maybe it's extremely high. Maybe it's incredibly high for the species that we are.
Well, for any two humans on Earth, so whether it's somebody from, say, Asia or somebody from North America, do you know how different they would be?
How is this evidence for Adam and Eve?
Because low genetic diversity is exactly what we'd expect given a special creation of two people. That's why the Bible predicted this. We've always predicted
low genetic diversity could exist for 100 different reasons.
The reason that the evolutionists give is not remotely so it remains in the realm of pseudoscience. That's the thing. Okay, I want to hear you comment on the chart that I gave regarding mitochondrial DNA and the fact that these lines, these mitochondrial DNA differences, they divide into three major groups designated L, M, and N. How is that not compelling to you, since that's exactly what we predict based on post-flood humanity and repopulation by three women, Noah's three daughters-in-law, and yet we see three major haplogroups that point us right back to Noah's three daughters-in-law? How come that's not compelling to somebody like yourself? Because it was compelling to me. So what, where's the difference there?
Well, just the fact that the mitochondrial DNA split into three different offshoots and Noah happened to have three different daughters. It could be coincidence. We need some more evidence. We need to substantiate that quite a bit more. I thought we were going to be talking about, writings of Noah or evidence of where the actual ark, or I don't know, what scientific evidence do we have for any of these characters?
See, here's the thing. The Bible in and of itself is a historical document. It's a documentary evidence. Now, I understand
Some of it's historical, not all of it.
I'm using the historical account as a non-ad hoc explanation by making predictions, retrodictions that flow from it. If it wasn't flowing, like for example, your answer to the 3 major haplogroups was what? It could be a coincidence. Well, the thing is, that's what you have to resort to is, yes, it's a coincidence. But the fact that there are 3 major haplogroups of human mitochondrial DNA in the world is amazing confirmation of the model. It's consistent. It's what we predicted. And then you have to say, well,
why
maybe
couldn't it have been just a tribe that was separated, a tribe that broke up because they didn't like each other anymore and went and lived far enough away that they didn't actually interact anymore?
And this would explain 3 major haplogroups that are joined by relatively short line segments,
sure,
indicating that there's not much difference between them. I mean, that once again is ad hoc. Because can you make any predictions based on that? Because I gave you some predictions that this mitochondrial DNA map can actually make.
Well, I'm just throwing out a hypothesis that it would fit the facts just as well as your hypothesis.
Right. But if it's a hypothesis that doesn't actually make testable and falsifiable predictions, well, then it's a failed hypothesis, right?
Well, if it's a hypothesis without any evidence, it's a failed hypothesis. But you haven't presented any evidence for your hypothesis either. So we're both in the same boat.
No, because I showed you on this diagram, on this mitochondrial phylogenetic map, there were subnodes. I talked about how these subnodes make testable predictions. Because if we came from these 3 nodes.
What are the testable predictions?
Okay, so if we come from these 3 nodes, okay, and the DNA differences are all a marker of time, as I explained in my opening, what we're looking at here with the radiating out from the 3 nodes are post-flood times, or in other words, the history of civilization. So what should we be able to predict? Well, we should be able to read the history of civilization from this tree. Romans, Greeks, Persians, because the tips of this tree, they're individuals. And these testable predictions are actually coming true. Not only that, the African lines, mutation rates, and predictions on mutation rates, for example, the Khoisan peoples have been made by creation scientists. Now, how come they're making the testable predictions?
None of this is making any sense, okay? Just
Now,
so you know, FYI.
Right. No, I understand that it might be. Well, yeah, it seems like it makes sense to you because what did you say? Well, maybe the 3 major haplogroups is just what? A coincidence. So you obviously see how.
None of this is evidence that these are from Noah. Nothing you said is any evidence that this is from Noah. My hypothesis fits everything that you just said. The tribe that broke up because they didn't get along, is, people were drinking too much. They got in a fight by the campfire. They broke up and went to opposite ends of the world, and that now we are their ancestors. How does my hypothesis not fit the facts that you're talking about here?
Well, I'd have to see either, future testable predictions. I'd have to see confirmed predictions. But at the end of the day, all I hear from you as an answer was, well, maybe it's just a coincidence. What about mitochondrial Eve? I seen that you talked about that, but you said that, mitochondrial Eve is not the Eve of the Bible. This is a genetic individual that lived thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. But why, if we actually use the actual empirically observed mutation rate for that human chromosome, why do studies indicate that mitochondrial Eve actually lived only thousands of years ago?
Well, I would have to look at those studies specifically, but I don't think that they're evidence. Those scientific studies are evidence for an actual Eve.
Well, let's say hypothetically that the studies that I'm talking about, based on empirically observed mutation rates of the mitochondrial DNA, if it actually did indicate that this mitochondrial Eve lived just recently, say within 6,000 years, is that convincing evidence for you that it's the Eve?
No, not at all, because what they're talking about with the mitochondrial Eve is the common ancestor that's most like modern humans. We talked about the fusion of chromosome 2. Okay. Right. There was a organism that had 24 chromosomes that had a baby that had 23 chromosomes. That baby was probably maybe substantially different. Like, obviously there had to be some that baby obviously reproduced because that chromosomal pattern repeated itself throughout history. So those changes take place, but they take place abruptly. A fusion of a chromosome, it's hard to imagine is going to take place slow over time.
Well, during my opening, I gave evidence against, and I'll let you comment on this. You brought up a couple topics. I just want to, I gave evidence against the human chromosome 2 for one. Secondly,
what is your evidence against it? Just to recap.
So for what, let's talk about human chromosome 2, but I do want to end this portion at least on mitochondrial Eve, because what I'm saying is we're using empirically observed mutation rates. Okay, we're not using phylogenetic evolutionary assumptions to come up with our date. But the thing is, evolutionists, they're doing similar analyses like I'm talking about, but they're not actually using observed mutation rates. Okay, and I can send you papers on this. So what they're using is hypothetical mutation rates that are actually 20-fold lower than what is observed. So they're justifying this by probably what you would assume too, based on certain evolutionary assumptions. So that's the thing. The only way they can come up with their date that they're talking about and the date that you're talking about is through evolutionary assumptions that don't actually fit the evidence. So that's why
all you're doing is attacking their position, which is admirable to some extent because science needs to be countered. So you're countering their position. Perhaps they got it wrong. This doesn't bolster your position at all because you're not presenting any evidence for your position. You're saying your worldview is incorrect, therefore my worldview, without presenting any evidence for your worldview, which is not, that's not a way to win the debate.
Well, what I'm saying is that this mitochondrial Eve that evolutionists or someone of an opposing worldview say is hundreds of thousands of years ago, based on empirical analyses using operational observable science, says that this mitochondrial Eve lived just thousands of years ago. So that is evidence for a mitochondrial.
No, it's not. How is it evidence for that?
1 minute. Wrap it up.
Okay, well, let's get into the chromosome 2 then.
Okay, so mitochondrial DNA, mitochondrial Eve lived thousands of years ago is not evidence of an Adam and Eve in a garden created by God. It's not. It's an evidence that in our evolutionary past, something called the mitochondrial Eve, that they're just calling her that for name's sake, lived.
So what it is, it's a combination of evidence. So the Y chromosome variation, the mitochondrial DNA variation, the low genetic diversity, all of this in combination actually demonstrates that we came from not just a small founding population, but a population of just 2, which is exactly what we read about in Genesis in regards to the special creation of Adam and Eve. We only have a minute. I do want to touch on the chromosome 2 fusion, and I'll let you kind of have the last words there. What I said was that human chromosome number 2 that you're saying arose from 2 ape-like chromosomes, I was giving evidence that this so-called fusion site is actually a functional DNA element in a human gene and not actually the result of a fusion. And I talked about how, just one sec, and I talked about how the telomeres we know serve as end caps to protect the DNA, and one of their jobs is what? To prevent fusion. So therefore, this in combination with the other evidence,
do you accept that there are parallel genes on both chromosomes? That the genes our genetic material is 95, 98% the same as chimpanzees.
No, it's more like 88%. But the thing is, a gene has been found, as I talked about, and it spans the entire fusion site. But genes are always found on one chromosome. So how can we have parts of it on both? And then they fuse together, and these parts are now together. It's just not realistic. And telomeres don't occur in the middle of genes. Genes are not around telomeres. So, I mean, I can go on and on and on as to why the human chromosome 2 is not actually the result of a fusion, which in and of itself makes the evolutionary prediction failed, and actually, once again, demonstrates special creation of human beings because, well, they're not related to chimps. They don't have ape ancestry is the point.
Evolution is wrong, therefore creation is not an argument, though. All you're doing is rebutting.
If there was no human chromosome 2 and there was no ancestry with apes, humans and apes, well, then where does that leave humans on the phylogenetic tree of life? Where does that leave them? Who are they related to? Are they related to apes? Are they related to dogs? If they're not related to apes, Adam, I want to ask you, where does humankind, are they a separate kind than all other life? If all this evidence suggests otherwise, how can you explain a separate kind called humankind that's not related to any other animal on the tree of life? Go ahead.
Programmers that created the simulation made it that way.
So some type of intelligent design, but not the God of the Bible.
Well, I'm just saying there are other hypotheses. Your argument is the standard evolutionary model is wrong, therefore creation has to be true. I'm saying no, there's this third option. We could say that we live in a simulation, and that's just the way the simulation programmers made it. Okay, why is your idea better than my idea?
That would be because my idea makes testable and falsifiable predictions. Does your idea that we were created by a
my idea makes testable and falsifiable
predictions on?
Sure.
I guess it would also probably predict that there is no chromosome 2 fusion. But at the end of the day, if there is so much evidence suggesting that humans and apes are not related based on the fact that evidence suggests that we're only 88%. I mean, that's 400 million DNA difference that actually exists between the two species, Adam. That's crazy. So what is the reality? You can deny the reality, but the reality is that humans are not apes, and they were created separately and uniquely in the image of God. So it flows perfectly from my position, a biblical position, and the Bible does prove this, but so does the DNA evidence.
Humans are apes, but anyway.
You guys have gone a little over. I let you go three minutes over.
Hey everybody, today we are debating whether or not Old Testament figures lived to be as old as 900 years old.
So you know what? That gives us 32 minutes of discussion. So guys, this is going to be a lot of fun. I know the audience is excited. So I guess we can get right into it. Whoever wants to start, whether it's, through a question. Guys, go ahead. The floor is yours. You got 32 minutes.
I guess I can go first since you said a lot there. Okay, well, telomere length. Yeah, our ancestors didn't actually need longer telomere lengths because telomeres are padding at the end of each chromosome that shorten based on the damage that they do in cell replication, but they don't always have to shorten. Actually, they've actually found a number of things that actually make them regrow. One of these things you can take, it's called astragaloside 65, or that's the active ingredient. It's called, it's an active ingredient in astragalus root, and it's called astragaloside 65. And they sell a product that's very, very expensive, but it's the active ingredient. And what it does is it boosts telomere length back up very, very high. So it shows that there's a reduction. They've also found that there's a couple things that boost telomere length outside of that. Another really good one is actually a carbon atom, a fullerene number 60. They've actually found that when they inject mice in the stomach with olive oil, with this fullerene number 60, that their telomere length boosted up so much that brown mice that only lived for an average of 2 years were killed after the experiment after 5 years. So Neanderthal, we know, had activated carbon itself because that's how they blew their handprint in cave paintings. They would take this charcoal and blow it, and they would get these mural pictures. So perhaps they could have consumed these things as well. They might have boosted their longevity, their telomeres. The environment, oxygen does cause more oxidative stress. That's why endurance athletes have more oxidative damage than short-term, than people that don't. But these are mitigated based on atmospheric conditions. And since we believe that the older atmosphere was more conducive, not because of the ozone itself, but because we believe that there was a canopy of water over it that fell during the flood, that itself was about 2 to 3 to 4 inches thick, they believe. And that would have changed the atmospheric condition, but have also really instantly repaired the ultraviolet damage, which would have been, shortening the telomeres and things like that as well. But since this is back and forth, go ahead.
Yeah, well, no, if I can add, so when you say they believe or we believe, who precisely is this? What evidence is there for the canopy that you were talking about on this water layer?
The canopy is, I say we, because that's a creationist model. The scientific community doesn't look at a canopy of ancient water that surrounded the earth. It was described in the Bible, and then it's not described in the Bible. It was talking about the fountains of the deep breaking forth, and then a rain for 40 days coming from a firmament. So we believe that it fell in. And when you read the Jewish literature, they believe that the dome was about 3 or 4 inches thick. And that was written down in their old text. That's not there anymore. So we concluded that was probably what made the things live longer, that there was more saturation, that the pressure was higher. You go back in time, the Earth was spinning faster, so there was a different atmosphere. And we see that when we test these things, there's more, and the sap of different things.
Well, we haven't seen that in ice core samples, which can go back far further than what you're talking about. And when you take an ice core sample, one of the great things about the North Pole and the South Pole is that they really haven't been touched by anything but the environment, but the atmosphere for quite a long time. So you can drill a hole very, very far down, and as snow falls, the snow actually traps a bit of the atmosphere in underneath as it falls. It then hardens, crystallizes, and you have atmosphere trapped in the ice. You then get 10, 15, 20, hundreds of feet of ice that show the atmosphere back 10, 20, 30, 100, 200, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 years. Maybe you can go back and tell what the atmosphere has been doing that far back, and that I'm aware of, there's absolutely no evidence to suggest any of that.
Well, we actually believe that differently when it comes to the ice core layers, because we actually found what's called the Lost Squadron, and the Lost Squadron were a plane that were lost during World War II, and they were when a very rich man wanted to come along and he wanted to buy those planes and he put them on his property or start a museum. Not really sure which one he wanted to do, but he wanted to go find these planes. So he spent a lot of money and he went out there, and he assumed that he would just see the planes, but he couldn't. And they were actually so far down that when they actually dug down, they found them, which would have been an equivalent of 135,000 years, because the layers weren't laid down every year. They were laid down by cold, hot, cold, hot, cold, hot. So the prediction of ice core layers, when they see those strata, which look like they're annual, are actually just dependent on the day or the season, and they can fluctuate and change. So
we've had observers up there since the 60s, and the observers, and I actually know observers who spend 6 months at a time in the Arctic, and that's not what they report actually seeing. That's not what they report how the ice layers are being formed. They're being formed precisely as scientists describe them.
I'm maybe in the poles because it's just continuously cold like that. There.
That's why they take. That's why they have to take that. You cannot take ice core samples from somewhere where the temperature goes to a point where it would melt it. You would then release the atmosphere into the air, and it would be absolutely worthless, and you couldn't do it. You have to do it at a place where there is ice that has been there literally for thousands of years. And there are places on this planet at the poles where ice has existed for thousands of years, and it falls and can be observed to fall in that pattern.
Would you consider Greenland to be one of those places?
I don't know enough, but I would have to say probably not, since as I recall, Greenland does thaw. I've never heard of an ice core sample being taken in Greenland. It may or may not. I'm not. The only ice core samples that I know of are in the Arctic.
Okay, because that's where we had. That's where those planes were found from. They were found in Greenland. So.
Well, Greenland does have some ice that I believe has been around for thousands of years. In fact, no, I know it's got ice that's been around for thousands of years, but I don't know.
I'm sorry to interrupt, guys. I just got some notification from the chat. If we could just move it back to, what the evidence is for humans, whether or not they live to 900 years. Go ahead, guys.
Okay. All right, I do think the environment has something to do with that, because we're talking about radiation and its effect on human cells, which is absolutely, and I agree with you on that, the picture of the guy with the sun having hit his face, that's exactly what sun damage does. And one of my concerns is the people in the Bible were out in the sun a very good deal. But to move on to a different subject, telomere length, because we were talking about that. One of the reasons that you need shorter telomeres is because that is an insulation against cancer. If your telomeres get too long, or if your telomeres are somehow regenerated, what would end up happening, and what they've actually been able to see in instances where they've been able to do this, which has been spotty at best as I understand it, but they've done it in mice, and what happens is they get cancer. And the reason they get cancer is because the cells are not actually dying off when they should. The truth is, everybody gets cancer all the time, every single day. All of us have loads of cancer cells. Those cells have numerous ways of self-destructing, and in a normal, healthy human being, they will self-destruct, and they won't go out of control. What we call cancer is really one of those cells that is reproducing at an alarming rate that cannot be destroyed in and of itself. It won't destroy itself. Every cell has the ability to destroy itself. I forget what the sac is called, but it's a sac of fluid that will rupture and destroy the cell. Or it can be destroyed when it replicates too many times and the telomeres are destroyed. If you either lengthen the telomeres or find a way to regenerate the telomeres, any animal in which you do this would start having a significantly higher quantity of life-threatening cancer because they're no longer able to destroy cancer cells. This strikes me as a problem.
Well, the telomere pattern, you don't want telomeres too long, but it's actually the reduction that actually causes the biggest problem, because when they take damage, they shorten. So that's what that TA65 does. It boosts them back up. But if the atmospheric was more conducive, which all these animals are showing that they're living longer when they're replicated in these older environments. Of course, no humans actually gotten one, because I guess they don't want to experiment on a human. They should, but the animals live longer, especially the insects. But they don't really match us because they absorb oxygen through their skin. But you know, with the less mutations of ancient human beings. And we know that mutations are what causes diseases in us, and dilapidation, and you know, more disease. And cancer is expected to double within the next 10 years. That's really, really quickly. So if we're compounding these more diseases, then we can go back and we can extrapolate that there's less diseases and less mutations. Then we should be able to find a more pure human being. And that's what we believe Adam and Eve were, a less mutation group of people. And then we see more mutations and more diseases and more problems now. Only medical intervention is stepping in now to keep us along. So when we look at the groups of people, you know, in Africa, they say they live about 50 years, but that's only because they take infant mortality into the equation, not
they do.
Total lifespan.
That's true, they do. But I did want to make a point. My uncle is available for human testing. So if they are looking for human testing, he hasn't volunteered, but I know his name and address, and you know.
I think there's a place in Texas that will take him.
Perfect. All right. So let's see. Telomere length. Once again, if you find a way to regenerate the telomeres, you're going to have a problem where any kind of uncontrolled reproduction of the cells is no longer. You've just destroyed one of the major mechanisms in stopping uncontrolled reproduction, i.e. stopping cancer. So you're going to see an increase in cancer, and it doesn't matter how you increase it. If you if you rejuvenate the telomeres somehow by a healthy lifestyle, you're going to have that problem. Second of all, oh shoot, I'm sorry. I guess I was trying too much to be clever, and so I've forgotten or lost track of a couple of the comments that you had made. Well, you had said what we expect to see and what we think happened, and that we think Neanderthals were stronger in one way, or because of fewer mutations. Once again, that we kind of concerns me, because I don't think that's the scientific community, and it seems like that's a hypothesis and not really evidence. I will say that the cause of increased mutations so far, it could be any number of things, but at a minimum, I agree with you, we are doing severe damage to our environment. We have done damage to the ozone layer. We've done damage to, we've had multiple nuclear detonations, both underground and on the surface. We've had had a number of carcinogens that we've put into our environment. So I think you're going to see mutations go up for those reasons alone. I don't think that you can extrapolate backwards and say, ergo, it was much better back thousands and thousands of years ago. Further, I will add that we have been able to eliminate a lot of diseases that they would have still had at that time, and a number of bacteria we can prove were still there. They did not have antibiotics then. That was a huge boost in our lifestyle. They did not have antibiotics, but they did have bacteria. And that we know, we've been able to find that in amber. So the idea that maybe after Adam and Eve, we had this pristine environment where there were no bacteria or carcinogens or things that could hurt people, I don't see any evidence for that, and a good deal of evidence to the contrary.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, you're right. If telomeres never shortened at all, and we could live for 1,000 years, we would die from cancer. It's called senescence. And you were right about that. But the senolytic activators have now been discovered for the first time ever. And what they actually found is, it's quite funny, they're actually found in compounds that our ancestors would have been able to obtain. Matter of fact, they've actually found that in a senolytic activator would be found in red onions and capers. These things are actually shown that they destroy senescence. I don't have any around me. What they do is these, especially when combined with black tea, they've actually found that the theaflavins combined with the quercetin and the other ingredients, they've actually found that they're very, very anti-senolytic. They destroy the cancer buildup that's going in. And since they believe that they just ate these foods on a natural daily basis, because they ate more normal foods, or I should say wild foods outside, that they would have actually been able to destroy the cancer before it actually builds up. But it's such a new avenue of science right now that, you know, people aren't even, they weren't really looking there. They were looking, in the medical field looks at chemicals to kind of fix things. They don't really look at herbalism. But
they've looked at cancer rates in the Mediterranean, and people who still have that diet, and while admittedly in some cases they do have a lower cancer rate, it's by a few percentage points. To suggest that the diet and that these things that you say they would have had ready access to, people eat those things right now, and there are some cultures that have been eating those things for the last 200 years and have not produced or shown a significant reduction in cancer.
Yeah, but remember the Pottinger study, when they actually took the animals' normal diet and they put them on a cooked food diet. These are animals in zoos. They by the 4th generation, they had horrible mutation problems and everything, because you took what they were designed to do and messed it up, kind of like humans today. You take humans back then, which were obeying what God told them to consume and were telling them to eat. We believe that those cancers, those mutations, these glycation or advanced glycotic end products won't be building up. You know, when you go to Burger King, you get horribly advanced glycotic end products because they process their foods and they're cooked, they're roasted by fire, and they're horrible. That's why they found that certain people age much faster. They have identical twins, and when you test an identical twin, you know, one will have cancer but the other won't. It's because of their lifestyle choices. So we believe that these lifestyle choices are what allow these people to live for so much longer. Also, the germline is the mutation load of that's passed on to the next generation that gets compounded. Those are the ones that kind of build up. They're the ones that accumulate by 63 to 64 mutations every single generation by the Icelandic people. They actually found from them. So these, if we extrapolate that and we go by 64 mutations every single generation, and we just do the simple math, we don't use the phylogenetic testing method, which we presume that there's a common ancestor 65 million years ago, but we just do 64 and then we minus that every 25 years generation, and we go back to ground zero. We go back about 6,000 years to Adam, so which is ground zero for mutation rate. And so that's why sorry, I don't want to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, please finish.
That's why Dr. Jensen predicted the extinction of the human race in 350 generations, and right now we're in the 300th generation. So his prediction is based on this mutational load of slightly deleterious mutations that constantly build problems. That's why if you look at what causes this cancer, prostate cancer, what causes breast cancer, it's a mutation of the BRCA1 and 2 gene. What causes prostate cancer? It's another mutation of another gene. So if we know that mutations are correlated with all these different diseases, but you take these mutations away with the original people, they don't have to worry about those diseases. They don't have to worry about those cancers. So we believe that the more pure and stronger we get these genetics, the stronger the people were. Like, for example, I don't want you to have gray hair, for example, right? So I say the graying of hair is a weakness of the liver, the shutdown of a metabolic enzyme called glutathione reductase and glutathione peroxidase. And it's what reduces a buildup of hydrogen peroxide in the body, which bleaches your hair white. So if you take a herb called Polygium multiflorum, also known as faux tie, it boosts this glutathione level and it makes your gray hair go away. So if the ancients had better livers, better genetics, less mutations, we believe that they could have lived a very long time. And that post that I did show on my thing where it showed that the Neanderthal tested for genes, that wasn't a creationist test. That was actually a scientific thing. I actually made a video on it on Standing for Truth's channel, which showed that they did the mutational load and they found Neanderthal only had a handful, but modern day has hundreds. So.
All right. I think I'm going to reiterate sort of a similar objection, which was there was a lot of we believe, including sort of early on, and I'm not. I think it's difficult to find scientific evidence in support of most of these claims. I do agree with some of the broader ones. Our food habits are extraordinarily destructive to us. There is no evidence that I've seen that is sufficient enough. And I think it's an interesting argument. Okay, if human beings for generations have been eating poor foods, then that would have changed us enough that we would no longer be the same species. Well, not the same species. Let me rephrase that. The damage was so progressive enough. I think this is what you're saying, that even today, if we were to eat all the proper foods, we would not see the full benefits that they would have seen 6,000 years ago. My objection to that is that we still discover on occasion new tribes in the Amazon. We've discovered new tribes in, what was the most recent one? That have much closer to what I think you would consider proper eating habits, and they have not been exposed to modern civilization. And to the best of my knowledge, every one of them that we've discovered has a normal lifespan, or at least what we would consider to be a normal lifespan as well.
Okay, I'll answer that one. Africa. I'll just make it a note. So do you believe then, yourself, that humans today soon will live to 1,000 years by turning on these old genes? Do you think that?
Well, to me, as far as I understand, the biggest problem is the telomeres. And we have found a few interesting things about telomeres that we can, in fact, affect them, which is new information, but the effect that we've been able to exert is very minor. There are lobsters which have lived over 1,000 years. I mean, a lobster 1,000 years old. We are still trying to understand how the lobster can get away with that, because we're all insanely jealous. But so we're still trying to figure that out. And I think that hypothetically, if we could solve a whole bunch of problems that we barely even know exist yet, perhaps, but to the best of our scientific understanding, the biggest problem is the telomeres. Nobody has even a hypothetical way or a theoretical way to solve that problem. Every solving of that problem causes other problems that would end up being prohibitive. You also have additional problems with life expectancy, which is even if you fix the telomeres, you can still have other diseases that crop in and shorten life expectancy. So I think the 1,000, I'm a little tired, forgive me. Well, the 125 cap that we sort of currently see as the standard cap is likely to be around for a little while. And if we make any significant changes, to it, we're going to be lucky to do much more than 10, 15, maybe 20% tops would be my experience. My educated guess, having no experience in the field.
All right. The lobster, good one. That was actually based on, they have a built-in high amount of metabolic enzyme called superoxide dismutase. They produce hundreds. Like, for example, you have a sea turtle. They produce about 250 micrograms per deciliter of superoxide dismutase. They live about 250 years. Humans only produce about 80 right now. So anyway, that was the answer to that one. Did you know when they find these lost tribes?
Thank you. That's good to know.
Yeah. The more superoxide dismutase your body can make, the longer you can live. And I have a list of things that can boost that up. Real quick for the audience.
That's a antioxidant?
Yes, it's the most powerful antioxidant. Your liver makes it. Basically, your liver makes superoxide dismutase, and then it makes glutathione peroxidase to break down the hydrogen peroxide that the superoxide dismutase did. So it's kind of like a ladder. It breaks these things down. But our liver stops functioning well at age 27.
Sitting on the couch for truth, could I have your attention for a second? Somebody in the live chat was giving me a hard time saying, what? Breathing is toxic? Did Nick really just say that? He just agreed with me. I want you to find that guy and say, no. Thank you. I'm sorry for interrupting.
I'll find him for you, Nick.
I appreciate it.
Least I could do for you.
Keep her going, guys. Keep her going.
All right. Well, I'm starting to get a little tapped out. I apologize. I did not. Well, I probably couldn't do anything about it. I'm starting to get a little tired and a little wonky. I can certainly continue for a bit longer, but I apologize. I didn't have the specs for the debate until just a short while ago, and I was not as prepared as I'd like to be. I apologize. But I can keep going. So let's keep going until either I collapse or I say something really stupid, which most people would say I've already done several times in this debate already.
No problem. You guys are doing great. The audience is having a good time. We've got exactly 9 minutes left. So
I can do that.
Yeah, go ahead, guys.
Well, if it's only 9 minutes and he's going to go after that, we could Q&A for audience. How's that?
I like that plan. Let's do it.
I completely understand it. Do they think this original protista produced a non-protista?
No.
They do.
They don't.
The chart shows a protista going to a human. Somewhere along the line, it changed from the protistas are still having babies today. Why don't they make another elephant or human or pine tree? You do think protistas produce something other than their kind. Your charts show it in the books, and I got to pay for that. Don't say you don't teach that. They do teach that. That's my objection.
No,
I'll show you the chart again. Let me get it up here.
We can.
Right. Hang on. I got it here. Right here.
Brian said, this is related. Brian Stevens said, JF explained this to you for the 1000th time. So we'll give you a chance to bring the chart up. Oh, that was a super chat that was connected to the same one. And
what is that a question for me? I didn't get it.
Oh, it was like a branch off from that question where he said, JF, the last gentleman you debated on here, he said, JF explained this to you about the dog, non-dog thing for the 1000th time. So
explained it to me. That's a slap and run technique. He didn't explain it to him. He made a statement. I countered it. The books do teach the protista turned into a bunch of stuff that is non-protista. What are these lines on this paper showing?
You've yet to show one that does.
What?
You've yet to show one that does.
I agree. You guys have yet to show a protista produce a non-protista. That's why your theories are religion. All these lines are religious belief. None of them are science. None of them. Nobody ever sees a protista produce a non-protista. Nobody ever sees a whale produce a non-whale. Nobody ever sees a crab produce a non-crab. But yet you got lines connecting them all like it's some kind of science, and it's absolute insanity. It's dumb. These charts the books are full of this stuff. Google family tree, and it'll have a protista, or an amoeba in some cases, producing all these life forms. Is a protista a dinosaur? Or did somewhere along the line the protista produced a non-protista? I'm tired. I need to go to bed. So
I predict you'll never show a textbook that shows that.
1 second. We just.
I'm showing you one right out of the textbook over here on the shelf. They do teach these kind of charts are in all the books. Tony, get up to date, son. Look, Google evolution family tree, and you will see a single-celled creature becoming a human and a whale and an amoeba. Is this a whale or a human or an amoeba, or did it somehow change to something other than its kind? Don't tell me they've explained to me about dogs. I understand dogs produce dogs, and protista produce protista. So protista cannot turn into a dinosaur and a human. This is baloney. This is the kind of stuff you spread on your plants for fertilizer. Go ahead.
Their next question, just two more questions, one for each of the debaters. So this one is from Ashley M. It's for, this one's again for Patient Beard. She asks, how do they explain the fact that the moon is moving away from the Earth, and when they calculate it backwards, their millions of years don't add up? Go ahead.
Their assumption when they do that math is that the moon has always been pulling away at that rate. There's other variables and factors involved. The moon is in an elliptical orbit, and the farther away that the moon actually gets from the Earth, the slower its orbit actually becomes, and those two things tend to cancel each other out. So when it's basically just a math error. So.
Okay, and if Dr. Hovind has a response?
Yeah. Spaceplace NASA.gov website ran an article just a few weeks ago about the moon is leaving the Earth. Will the moon ever leave Earth's orbit? Space answers. Astronomy books are found of quoting the fact that the moon is gradually spiraling away from the Earth. It is, by the way. Why is the moon leaving us? From physics.org. I don't think anybody who studies this argues, yes, the moon is leaving us about 1.5 inches a year. So obviously,
at current rate.
Closer. Now, if he wants to argue it's in an elliptical orbit, I agree. The point you're missing, that's a diversion from the point. The point is that elliptical orbit is enlarging. The moon is leaving us. Everybody agrees with this.
But the
this
rate is not the same. You can't.
We just want to let, sorry, Paige, and because it's your question, we'll let you have the final word. We just want to allow Kent to finish his thought here. Go ahead.
Okay. 1,000 years ago, the math tells us it'd be about 125 feet closer. 1 million years ago, it'd be 28 miles closer. Not a big deal. 10 million years ago, 284 miles. This is with a linear progression. It was much more likely a geometric or logarithmic progression back in time. But even just with a linear progression, you go back 1 billion years, the moon is 28,000 miles closer.
The linear progression is the math.
They've known about this. If you brought the moon about 1.4 billion years ago, the orbit would collapse because of the inverse square law. Article right here. Oh, the evolution of the lunar semi-major axis presents a well-known timescale problem. The lunar orbit collapses a little over 1 billion years ago. Astronomical Journal. They've known this for 60 years. The moon orbit is increasing. It's going to collapse 1.4 billion years ago. It is not logical to say the moon's been going around the Earth for 4 billion years. It's just not common sense. We can do all the math on that if you'd like. But this is just, it's common sense. Science understands the moon cannot be billions of years old. So it is based on known physics. It's not an assumption. They know. Inverse square law. You half the distance, you quadruple the attraction. You're incorrect. The moon is just one of 100 ways to prove this system cannot be billions of years old.
Assuming that 1.5 inches linearly is the math error. Okay, to say that the moon is leaving us at 1.5 inches per day or per year doesn't tell us what it was leaving us at 1,000 years ago. Okay, there's more math involved than to just linearly go backwards like that. That's right. The math error, is to just linearly go back. You have, yes, 1 to 1.4 billion years ago, but the moon has not been leaving us at that rate consistently throughout that entire time.
Well, that's where you have the math upside down, Jared. As you get closer, it becomes even worse. The moon would have to be leaving faster initially to get out where it is today, because at a certain distance called Roche's limit, it cannot orbit. You cannot get the moon within a certain limit. It's like two magnets. You get them close and bam, they snap together. But so you have the math exactly upside down. The lunar orbit collapses about 1 billion years ago. They've known this for 60 years.
Linearly. And that's a 1954 argument there, article that you're reading there.
And you're relying on an 1859 Charlie Darwin book. Get up to date, son.
Well, the thing is that we've been finding more and more evidence that confirms that 1854 theory.
Okay,
we haven't been finding more evidence that God did anything. We've been finding less evidence that God did anything.
Here's a 1994 book. 40 years later, the lunar orbit collapses 1 billion years ago, 1994. Here's an article from 3 weeks ago saying the evolution of the lunar semi-major axis presents a well-known timescale problem. It is falling apart, and it's all based on logarithmic progression. Now, it would not be a linear regression from the Earth. You need to study a little math on that one, but it is not correct to say that we can explain the moon. The moon-Earth system is less than 1.2 billion years old. There's no other way to explain it. Now, if you need 4.5 billion years to turn your frog to a prince, I'm sorry, get a new myth. Hello, Jay. I watched a couple of yours. I had never heard of you until somebody pointed out that you had done some stuff about me. And so you got 37,000 subscribers, and you've done 153 videos, this one says. I've seen some of your videos, and all you do is criticize Christians or Christianity. You freely criticize Ken Ham and his model of Noah's Ark, yet you never give any evidence for what you do believe. Quit criticizing others and show me what you've got, son. Paul, any fool can criticize. Build a better theory. Explain how the world got here and give your real scientific evidence. Your constant criticism is a red herring to distract attention away from the stupidity of your own religion of evolution. You gave up on Christianity, and now you believe you came from a rock. Son, you got slapped with a dumb stick. Wake up, Paul. You didn't come from a rock. You swallowed a stupid theory. Wake up. It doesn't say they created it. They developed it from an already existing plant. They didn't create broccoli. It's a matter of what does that word create mean? Create, to cause to come into being. They did not create broccoli. They developed broccoli from already existing plants. That was my whole point for the whole series. Wake up, son. Gee whiz. I am right. Man did not create broccoli. And out of the 100 ones I did, or more, you pick that one, and you're still wrong about that one, son. I don't know what it's going to take for some of these atheists. A bigger hammer, I guess. Oh, yeah. The banana was not created by man. It was developed into a more tasty fruit, but it wasn't created. Paul.
We spend a lot of time at Apologia looking at the claims of the Creation Today ministry of one Eric Hovind.
That is correct. You devoted 60 videos criticizing my son. You haven't devoted one to giving evidence for your dumb theory, have you, Paul?
Okay, if there's one thing I know better than the New Testament, it's VeggieTales.
You know, I believe that completely, son. I believe that. We can't trust Kent about VeggieTales, so we can't trust him on science. Where did you go to school, son? Think, Paul. Science means knowledge, okay? Think. One-dimensional dot of nothing contained everything in the universe. That's what you believe, isn't it, Paul? You gave up on Christianity and Jesus Christ to believe something that stupid. We need a bigger hammer for you, son.
Cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, kale, Brussels sprouts, collard greens, and more not only began as the same species, but they remain genetically the same species to this day.
Paul, think what you're saying, son. Son, hey, Paul, wake up, son, wake up. That's not evolution. That's a variation of the kind.
These breeds obviously represent visible and documented evolution.
Is it more? If you think that represents evolution, you are certifiably insane, Paul. Why don't you, first of all, get a real face on there. I don't know what you look like. Why you have the cartoon character you hide behind. I predict broccoli, cauliflower, all those plants will always remain plants. I predict you will never be able to crossbreed broccoli for 1 trillion years and produce a frog. I'm sorry to have to whack you so many times, but son, you really have a thick skull, and you ought to quit picking on Christians and Bible contradictions. If you don't know the difference between create and develop, I couldn't trust you to sharpen a pencil. Paul, your whole program is a red herring shifting the burden of proof. Somebody sticks their head up and says something dumb like, hey, humans and mosquitoes are related. Whack them back down. No, they're not.
For Truth's whole position a unfalsifiable narrative. His ideas are falsifiable. For Truth's whole position a unfalsifiable narrative. His ideas are falsifiable. Tell me how it's falsifiable, or tell me what would falsify it. He never actually gave me an answer to that.
We actually don't know the real speciation events, and we've actually made testable predictions based on this model that we course, the gold standard of science is making these testable and falsifiable predictions. And we've made it on mutation rates. We've made it on, DNA function. So the, many testable and falsifiable predictions that we've made. For example, the tree that I always show that Dr. Nathaniel Jensen has derived based on mitochondrial DNA that points right back to Noah's 3 daughters-in-law makes testable predictions on the stamp of civilizations. For one, the mountains that I'm talking about that are formed from the uplifting and the collisions of the plates as a result of this, we've made a prediction. So we predicted that the cold ocean crust, if our model is true, it should still be cold. Rock layers have ripple marks, meaning there was a global flood in the past, and the flood sorted animals by ecosystems. Like I said, sea creatures first, then land creatures, as you would expect in a flood. That's exactly what we see. And I've got a testable, falsifiable prediction that has been confirmed. Seismic data, actually, and you can look this up to yourself. I can provide the paper from NASA. It's actually revealed enormous slabs of cool rock that are under North America. So down in the core itself, what I'm saying, which should be warm, it's actually confirmation of flood geology. The statements that I just told you about the global flood being falsifiable in regards to the catastrophic plate tectonics model, if you want me to go into it again, we've seen rapid magnetic reversals, also confirmation of the floods.
His evidence, at least his primary evidence, was "For the Bible tells me so."
I've already shown you that my explanations are not based on God did it.
Beginning of the debate, he talks about how it's evolutionism, trying to make it out to be something that it's not. That really bothered me the entire debate. As well as him thinking that evolution says anything about origins or anything like that. Abiogenesis and even Big Bang territory. And I feel like that's pretty disingenuous too.
Abiogenesis? I didn't mention anything about abiogenesis. Although chemical evolution is obviously needed to be explained if you're going to have a coherent theory of biological evolution. But that's why I actually asked him in the beginning of the discussion period, what is your definition of biological evolution? And we both agreed that biological evolution means a change in allele frequency or a change in gene pool over generations, in populations, of course. And we agreed on that.
I heard you say that, evolution for the most part, at least biological evolution would mean, a change in allele frequency or gene frequency in populations over generations. Would you agree with that as a valid definition for biological evolution?
Well, yeah, I think that's specific enough, I guess.
I brought up in the debate was the idea that 2 people could have produced an entire population of a species, and I find that to be very interesting because that's not actually what genetics shows us. Genetics actually shows us that if there are only 2 of a certain species, that is actually not enough genetic diversity in order to get an entire population of a single species. He claims that genetic similarities in human DNA actually points to Adam and Eve, and this is actually not true at all.
When we look at mitochondrial Eve, the data says that mitochondrial Eve is very literally the mother of us all, and Gaulis Engineer here seems to misunderstand what I'm saying in regards to the argument, because 99% of my opening statement, as usual in my debates, was not addressed, and the small number of mutations that separate modern people from this sequence of mitochondrial Eve clearly and evidently indicates and suggest that mitochondrial Eve lived in the recent past. And there just has not been enough time. That's why the evolutionary rebuttals to this, where they say, oh, mitochondrial Eve lived hundreds of thousands of years ago. The creationists, they're misusing the data. No, no, no. No, godless engineer. There has not been enough time for very many new mutations to have accumulated on this chromosome. And based upon the actual empirically observed mutation rate for this human chromosome, studies clearly indicate and suggest this mitochondrial Eve had to have lived recently, just thousands of years ago. And of course, evolutionary scientists, they've done similar analyses, but instead of just using the actually observed mutation rate, they have been compelled to use hypothetical mutation rates that are about 20-fold lower than what is actually observed. And of course they have justifications for this, because they're looking at certain evolutionary assumptions. And the most fundamental assumption that they actually make is that molecules to man, fish to fisherman type evolution, bacteria to biologist evolution is an absolute fact. And so all data must be force-fitted. That's why rescue device after rescue device is invented, because this data has to be force-fitted to support the paradigm. And that's why they calculate mitochondrial Eve the way that they do. And this is the same that goes with Y chromosome Adam. I mean, there's just no way to refute it.
So similar DNA would not point to that.
Well, it's interesting. When the Human Genome Project mapped the human genome, they said there's only one race of people. You know what that confirms? The Bible. Because we all go back to Adam and Eve, we're all one race.
So I don't think it confirms the Bible. It just makes the Bible consistent with nature on this one point.
Once again, I don't think godless engineer here quite understood what I meant about low genetic diversity in human beings. I mean, I think it's only about 0.5% different max difference between any two human beings, pointing us right back to the fact that we only came from two people, Adam and Eve. And we are seeing the rise and fall of the so-called near extinction event, the rescue device. They wouldn't come up with this population bottleneck rescue device if there wasn't some absolute truth to this. And we're seeing firsthand the demise, the death of this key evolutionary paradigm belief that, there was supposedly a prolonged evolutionary bottleneck concurrent with the evolution of modern humans, of course, over deep time. And godless engineer here spent half the debate appealing to deep time. If I were to tell you that Mary Poppins could fly slowly through the air with her umbrella, you'd say, standing for truth, you're crazy. That's a fairy tale. And you'd be right. But if I said Mary Poppins could fly quickly through the air with her umbrella, according to godless engineer, you'd say, yeah, that's more believable. That's scientific. No, they're both fairy tales. And over this deep time, according to evolutionary theory, any significantly large population will undoubtedly accumulate enormous numbers of mutations, resulting in enormous amounts of genetic diversity. And this is a major fatal blow problem for evolutionary theory, because we can now see that it is absolutely clear that mankind is genetically very similar. We have very limited genetic variation. And this is obviously expected given the biblical model, as I've shown in my opening presentation, because we all come from just two people. So limited diversity obviously is easy to explain, but from this evolutionary perspective that godless engineer wants us to believe in so badly, this limited human genetic diversity, according to them, it requires it's a rescue device, this near extinction event that supposedly came before modern man's abrupt emergence and appearance and this supposed conquest of the planet. But at the end of the day, this explanation of a population bottleneck, this near extinction event, all it is a rescue device, and it's pseudoscience because it's so easily debunked. Because if you actually look at this near extinction event, this genetically compromised population that actually explodes into different parts of the planet and apparently, seizes dominion over the world, because yes, it can conceivably, have maybe reduced overall human diversity. But the thing is, it is just a post hoc embellishment of this evolutionary theory because it actually is incredible. And the reason why is because small, very minute bottleneck populations, they have extremely significant problems. And this is the exact rebuttal that I'd bring up if these evolutionists actually came prepared and tried to rebut my claims about low genetic diversity and all this evidence for Y chromosome Adam, mitochondrial Eve, 3 major haplogroups. I mean, everything just fits perfectly in a biblical model. But if there's, let's say, this genetic diversity and this rescue device here, it's going to require and involve an extended near extinction event, and it's going to be associated with severe, significant inbreeding. And that's why it's not even remotely feasible, because from the evolutionary perspective, human genetic homogeneity, it remains a very serious theoretical and hypothetical problem, because according to the biblical perspective, there's no problem at all, because of course there were no mutation, there was no genetic load, there was no genetic buildup with Adam and Eve and then immediate post-creation. But with the biblical perspective, the bottlenecks that we see in Scripture, they were both brief. There wouldn't have been any issue. There would have been very little genes lost, even according to the pre-existing heterozygosity hypothesis. But the reason why this very limited human genetic diversity is a huge problem for evolutionary theory, because it does lead to unrestrained storytelling. And that's what evolution is all about. It's all about storytelling. And this limited human genetic diversity, it's very obviously compatible with the biblical perspective. It doesn't require all this far-fetched inventions and storytelling that evolutionists talk about.
So we know this because of fossil evidence that we found. We've found fossils in the past that connect dogs to a proto-dog-like animal, and you can trace all of those all the way back. Doing was he kept talking about de-evolution, which is kind of a made-up word. There is no de-evolution. I don't know what his concept of de-evolution is. I don't know how, like, Adam and Eve were such superior versions of humanity that now we're a diluted mess or something, or we're de-evolving from that higher state. Not going to try to figure out what the fuck he was talking about. There's a lot of other things like lactose tolerancy, our ability to drink milk and milk products. That was a mutation. He also claimed that evolution is self-limiting, and I really don't see the self-limiting nature of evolution, because evolution is just a change in a population over time that eventually ends up with different species depending on how those changes affect the organisms in that population. So I don't see how this is self-limiting. I only see it limiting when, bad mutations crop up, and those are not as prevalent as he would like to make them out to be.
Now, genomic degradation, genetic entropy There is plenty of empirical data for that.
Of course, this is going off of like really bad science, pseudoscience, to which the actual proponent of the genetic entropy and all of that, he doesn't actually find any data in real world observations to support his genetic entropy.
Dr. John Sanford did not admit that there's no evidence for genetic entropy. Genetic entropy in real time, Alzheimer's disease, dementia, autism, asthma, autoimmune, cancers, immunological diseases, there is a pandemic. A lot of it could also be epigenetic mutation. This all means that we are seeing entropic degeneration on all levels. And you can even increase selection intensity, but the problem won't stop. Can't be stopped. We are a dying people in a dying world. I was trying to explain to him that the mutation rate, the accepted mutation rate is 100 new mutations per person per generation. That means that if there's 7 billion people on the planet, and the fact that most mutations are in the non-selection zone, that's 700 billion new mutations entering the human population this generation alone. And yes, they have rescue devices. That's how they know that it is a real problem. Population geneticists know that it's a real problem. That's why they've come up with rescue mechanisms such as synergistic epistasis, mutation count mechanism, but they've all been falsified. And the reason why is because low impact mutations, these near neutral, low impact deleterious mutations, they continuously accumulate, and there is a huge selection threshold. We see it in human populations. We see it in ancient human species. We see that a lot of these so-called human evolutionary ancestors, such as Hobbit, Homo erectus, the Neanderthal, certain Neanderthal populations were seen to actually be 40% less fit than modern man today, including Homo naledi. A lot of these ancient species, what they suffered from was reductive evolution. That's why you see the reduction in brain volume and body size, and you see these pathologies because these isolated inbred groups, the genetic mistakes, the hidden reservoir of genetic mistakes were exposed. And that led to much faster genetic entropy. And inbreeding, it's a sneak preview into where we are going genetically as a species. We see it in bacteria. We see bacteria, they're susceptible to reductive evolution. We see Lenski's E. coli experiment. We see that they've lost genes short term, but it's long-term degeneration. They've observed a shrinking functional genome size, and there's been adaptations, but they've generally been degenerative adaptations. We see it in viruses. H1N1 went from a red-hot pandemic to a whimper to an extinction event in 90 years. This was the human version. Of course, this is genetic degeneration at work. Just like I said, Lenski's E. coli experiment, he's trying to prove large-scale evolution. What he's actually proving is genetic degeneration and biblical creation. The beneficial mutations, and people will try and straw man me and say, oh, you're saying there's no beneficial mutation. Yes, there was beneficial mutations in Lenski's bacterial experiments, but they were reductive, loss of function, loss of promoter, loss of genes. They're painting themselves into a corner. They're lazy and they're handicapped. We see genetic degeneration on all levels. I mean, we see it in cheetah populations, butterfly populations, like I said, human populations, viruses, bacteria. It is most certainly irrefutable. Just think of it this way. We have a genome of 3 billion letters. If you take out one letter, change one letter randomly, are you going to have a huge fitness effect? No, it's going to have a tiny fitness effect. And in reality, in fact, it's like rust on a car. You can't see each rust event, but it's continuous and destructive. And he's always asking, what's this loss of information? And I gave him examples where we can measure levels of homozygosity versus heterozygosity. We can look at certain mutations like deletions, for example. We can look at genes that are broken. I mean, if something's broken, that indicates a loss of something. I mean, that's why it's an evolutionary tactic to avoid the clear evidence of genetic degeneration information and say things like, and ask questions like, well, what do you mean exactly by loss of information? Take a book the size of an encyclopedia and, start introducing typographical errors. I mean, is one single spelling mistake going to have a huge, huge effect? No, of course not. But the buildup of these mistakes over time, that's where the information loss comes from. So to deny that is just to deny reality. And
I do like how he said that fossils are circumstantial evidence.
Fossils don't prove evolution.
Fossils don't mean anything as far as evolution is concerned. We don't need them. Forget fossils. They just aren't important.
Also, he has a really bad idea of what radioactive decay is.
Age isn't really measured, godless engineer. Rather, certain processes and amounts of materials, those are what are measured, and then inference is made. This age is inferred, and the fact that radiometric ages for rocks of known ages actually turn out to be so vastly inaccurate and wrong is a strong, strong indication and absolute proof that one or more of the assumptions that are used in this radioisotope dating is incorrect. And secularists, what they do is they measure the amounts of the radioactive parent and the daughter isotopes in the present. Then they make a huge, massive host of unprovable, unknowable, impossible, naturalistic assumptions, and then extrapolate backwards in time to make what is essentially a guess about an age. It's a guessing game, just like all the storytelling you hear from evolutionists. Assume uniformitarianism, which is exactly what godless engineer did here in the debate. The present is the key to the past, they'll say. And think about it this way, according to our model. If God instantly created, let's say, trees, and then we analyze this, the leaves would have chlorophyll as leaves do today, but it didn't come by normal processes. I think that's obvious and evident. So when God made the first rocks, they had atoms in them. If we come along late, let's say we come along later and say that this lead must have come from decay of uranium, therefore we will use that to date the rock, you'd be wrong, as there would be lead there to begin with. Why shouldn't there be? So at the end of the day, there's so much evidence that the Earth and the universe can't be billions of years old, simply based by their own dating methods. Let's use carbon-14, for example. Evolutionists assume it's always been the same radiocarbon influx, and yet the problem is that carbon-14 is produced in the atmosphere. This is a fact the evolutionists even agree with, scientific fact, that as a result in this atmosphere of cosmic ray bombardment of the atmosphere itself, and if you have a stronger magnetic field in the past, like we'd say according to the biblical base model, which the evidence shows as well, it's not just ad hoc or anything like that, and the field protects from cosmic radiation, then radiocarbon production would have been less in the past. Diamonds, for example, they're made up of carbon and have radiocarbon in them. Diamonds are formed deep inside the earth, and they can't be contaminated internally or externally due to the hardness of the substance. The carbon-14 has to be intrinsic to the diamonds. It could not be from the atmosphere itself. And I could go on and on and on. I mean, the evidence, genetics, geology, astronomy, it all points to a biblical-based model. Even when we were talking about genetics and junk DNA, and I was trying to get him to test hypotheses with me, because according to the pre-existing heterozygosity model, we have predicted that the vast majority of DNA differences are functional compared to evolutionists, which will say that the vast majority of the genome is junk. They'll say 10 to 20% max is functional. And this overturning of the junk DNA era, contrary to what godless engineer was saying, has destroyed their very best evidence. For example, human to chimpanzee genetic identity that they used to say was 98 to 99% similar, the actual identity is now known to be 88%, probably even less. That's over 400 million DNA differences that actually exist between the two species. When they sequence these genomes, it's a lot of it's based on cherry-picked data. The humans, for example, the human chromosome 2 that they say that arose through a fusion of two ape-like ancestors, or two ape-like chromosomes, this purported fusion site is actually a functional DNA element in a human gene. So much genomic data that's actually refuting that. because we only understand less than 5% of the DNA language based on the gold standard of functional testing, which is gene knockout tests. So the more we learn, the accumulating papers are suggesting more and more intricacy, complexity, and function to this genome. They'll say humans and chimpanzees share genetic mistakes, you know, these pseudogenes, but these pseudogenes are now known to be functional DNA elements and not actually mistakes. I mean, you can look at Dr. Vanim of BioLogos. He's probably one of their best proponents. And he used to always say that humans possess the broken remnants of an ancient chicken gene, but the further and the more we know about the DNA language, we now know that no such remnant actually exists. Because what it is, this supposed fragment, it's a functional DNA element. Junk DNA, it's been overturned. Just like vestigial organs have been overturned. The more we learn, the less ignorant we become, the more evolutionism is refuted.
I like how he doesn't consider us apes in general, which later on in the debate he talked about how the genetics show that we're not related to chimpanzees or chimps, or we're not copied from them or something. I guess it's because we look different or something like that.
It's often said that we humans share 50% of our DNA with bananas, 80% with dogs, and 99% with chimpanzees. Taken literally, those numbers make it sound like we could pluck one cell from a chimp and one from a human, pull out the tangled bundles of DNA known as chromosomes, unroll each one like a scroll, and read off two nearly identical strings of letters. But in reality, the human and chimp scrolls don't sync up so easily. Other large mutations revised huge sections of text, duplicating a chunk of human DNA here, erasing a chunk of chimp DNA there, while throughout the scrolls, tiny mutations swapped one letter for another. When researchers sat down to compare the chimp and human genomes, those single-letter differences were easy to tally, but the big mismatch sections weren't. For example, if a genetic paragraph, thousands of letters long, appears twice in a human scroll, but only once in its chimp counterpart, should that second human copy count as thousands of changes, or just one? And what about identical paragraphs that appear in both genomes, but in different places, or in reverse order, or broken up into pieces? Rather than monkey around with these difficult questions, the researchers simply excluded all the large mismatch sections, a whopping 1.3 billion letters in all, and performed a letter-by-letter comparison on the remaining 2.4 billion, which turned out to be 98.77% identical. So, yes, we share 99% of our DNA with chimps if we ignore 18% of their genome and 25% of ours. And there's another problem. Just as a small tweak in a sentence can alter its meaning entirely, or not at all, a few mutations in DNA sometimes produce big changes in a creature's looks or behavior, whereas other times, lots of mutations make very little difference. So just counting up the number of genetic changes doesn't really tell us that much about how similar or different two creatures are.
His primary evidence was "For the Bible tells me so."
We're past the whole, God did it. I mean, do you believe that there would be any types of limits to that, like whether it's genomic, physical limits? Like, do you believe, let's say, do you believe you can get a dog, say, ever as big as, say, an elephant or a whale? We know there's animals that exist that are as big as, say, elephants and whales, like elephants and whales, or even a dog as small as, say, a flea. We know there's insects that exist that are as small as a flea, like a flea. So do you believe there's any type of limits to the change?
For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.